It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that. We don't know if it was a commercial aircraft. We don't know if it was a private aircraft. We have no idea how many were on board or what the extent of the injuries are right now. We have, I understand, an eyewitness on the phone right now. Sir, good morning. This is Bryant Gumbel. Could you give us your name?
Yeah, my name is Stuart.
Stuart, where are you right now?
I'm working at a restaurant in Soho.
All right, so tell us what you saw, if you would.
I was waiting at a table and I literally saw it seemed to be like a small plane. I just heard a couple noises. It looked like it bounced off the building, and then I just saw a huge ball of fire on top, and then the smoke seemed to simmer down. And it just, a lot of smoke was coming out, and that's pretty much the extent of what I saw.
A private aircraft?
I'm not sure if it was it just seemed like a smaller plane. I don't think it was anything commercial.
Could you tell us whether or not it was a prop or a jet?
I honestly don't know. It happened too quickly.
Characterize the scene for us down there right now, if you would.
Excuse me?
Can you tell us about the scene down there right now?
Right now, people are just on the street looking at the building. The building, there's just a lot of smoke. It's not too crazy down where I am.
How far away from the World Trade Center specifically are you?
I'm actually on Thompson Street North. I'm not too far.
It's 8:54 right now, Stuart. Can you tell me when this happened exactly?
I would have to say about 10 minutes ago.
About 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Is this normally an area that is heavily trafficked by aircraft, or is this an area that aircraft steer pretty clear of?
I really don't know that information.
Is there much panic around there?
Just people on the street coming out looking. There was panic at first, but it seemed to slow down right now.
We're looking at a picture of a great deal of smoke coming out of the building. Can you please tell us? I mean, was there, after you heard this crash, was there smoke immediately?
No, there was a big ball of fire on the top of the building, and then as that simmered down, there just seemed to be a ton of smoke. And pretty much immediately.
I hear fire engines in the background. Has that been going since you saw this crash, or is that kind of late arrival?
It happened almost pretty much after we heard the crash.
Almost after you heard the crash.
It was pretty quick when we heard sirens and people acting on it.
Were you looking up as the plane approached the building, or did it only catch your attention after it crashed into the World Trade Center?
I heard a sort of a crashing sound, but I looked up quick enough to actually see something go into the building, but everything happened so fast I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at.
So there's no way you can know whether or not the plane seemed to be in trouble before it crashed into the building?
Oh, no, I couldn't tell.
It's hard for us to tell from the picture we're seeing just how far down from the top that plane crashed. Have you any better eyesight to it from your vantage point?
Not really. All I know is it definitely wasn't the top of the building, because that seems to be intact from what I saw. I really can't tell right now.
Can you tell us anything about how much debris came crashing to the ground, and whether or not anybody was hurt as a result?
I honestly don't know. I just saw a lot of what looked like crumbling glass, maybe just a lot of stuff falling down, but I can't tell you debris-wise.
Obviously, the timing of this is important. It comes before 9 o'clock. Perhaps, and we say that in hopeful fashion, perhaps not everybody was at work, because if that building was in fact crowded with workers, we're looking at probably some casualties and injuries of considerable proportions. But right now there's no way of telling that. Mr. Stewart, just one more time, and I know I'm exhausting what little information you have, but we have people joining us every moment. Take me through again where you were, when this happened, what you saw.
I was serving tables at a restaurant, and I just heard sort of like a boom sound. It almost sounded almost like an earthquake sound, and I looked up and I saw literally something like, it might have even bounced off a little bit of a building, and next thing I know, I saw a big ball of fire on the top of the building, and just lots of smoke and what looked like to be debris or glass falling down. and it happened really quick. It's really hard to...
Okay. Stuart, I thank you very much. I appreciate that, sir.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're on the line with another eyewitness. Sir, this is Bryant Gumbel in New York.
Oh, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. You're Wendell?
Yes, I am.
Wendell, can you give me your last name?
Klein.
Wendell Klein. Tell me where you are, if you would.
Well, right now I'm back in the hotel. I'm in the hotel offices here, the front office.
You're in the... Okay, where were you when
I was standing right in front of the hotel. I'm the doorman there. And...
The hotel. Which hotel?
Marriott World Trade Center.
Right across from the World Trade Center.
It's actually right in between them.
Right in between the World Trade Center.
Yes.
Okay, so you were standing outside, and tell us what you saw and what you heard.
Well, what I heard first, an explosion. And I just figured that it was a plane passing by. Then all of a sudden, stuff just started falling, like bricks and paper and everything. And so I just kind of like ran like inside to get away from the falling debris and glass and so forth. Then after like everything stopped, because it like was falling in the street and the cars were crashing into each other. Then when it kind of stopped, I heard a guy screaming. And when I looked over, there was this guy that was on fire. So I kind of like ran over and I tried to like put the fire out on him. And he was like screaming, and I just told him to roll, and he said he can't. And then another guy came over with his bag and kind of like put the flames out on him. So right now he's being taken care of. I just had everyone call the ambulance and stuff so they can help him out. He
caught fire as a result of the falling debris?
Yeah.
How much debris? Can you give us an idea of how much came crashing to the ground?
It's just a lot. Bricks, a lot of bricks, a lot of glass. I'm like enough to like damage cars on the street, make cars swerve into each other, that kind of thing.
Any other people on the ground that you saw?
No, just
hurt?
Just him so far.
Tell me about the traffic down in that area, and I'm talking about human traffic.
Human traffic? Well,
at 8:55, which is about the time when this happened, 8:45, 8:55.
Right. On my side, where I'm standing, there's not a whole lot because it's basically right in front of the hotel, so you don't get too much, but you do get enough. Get some.
What about traffic in the building? I mean, you work basically between the two towers.
Yes.
Most people arriving for work before or after 9 a.m.?
Before. Basically, in my hotel, I have people who are just leaving and going to meetings. Outside my hotel, I just had people waiting for their cars to take them to their various destinations, that kind of thing.
I hear alarms going off down there. What's happening?
That's our hotel alarm, and basically, I guess that went off automatically. They've evacuated everyone in the hotel. They evacuated all employees.
They have evacuated the hotel?
Yes.
Immediately?
Yes.
Can you give me an idea of what the scene is like down there?
What the what is like?
What the scene is like down there at the World Trade Center?
Just people are like crying and panicking, like want to know what's going on. When I came inside, there were a lot of people who wanted to go out to see what was going on, but the security kind of like kept them at bay and kept them inside. Basically, right now, I just still have people going towards the bar area. They're trying to evacuate everyone out of here. That kind of thing. Is
this an area, Mr. Klein, that is normally trafficked by small planes, or is it an area that they're generally steer clear of?
You do get some. I do see some passing. Basically, those planes like I do see passing are like those, like the planes from Washington, D.C. area. Like so, there won't be like huge planes, but big enough.
Are you hearing anything, Wendell, about what kind of a plane it was,
no.
or how many were on board?
No. Basically, all I got was my wife called me. She told me that it was a plane crash, and basically, I really don't know what's going on so far.
Do you know if it was a private aircraft or a commercial plane?
That I don't know.
You don't know?
No, sir.
You're not seeing any evidence of people being carried out of the building yet?
There's a woman that was just carried. I guess she fainted or something, but I don't see any physical injuries to her.
All right. Mr. Klein, thank you very much, sir.
All right. Good talking to you, sir.
I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
I understand Teresa Renault is with us right now. Miss Renault, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
This is Bryant Gumbel. I'm down on 59th and 5th. Where are you?
I am in Chelsea, and we are at 8th and 16th. We are the tallest building in the area, and my window faces south. So it looks directly onto the World Trade Center. And I would say, approximately 10 minutes ago, there was a major explosion from probably, it looks like about the 80th floor. It looks like it's affected probably 4 to 8 floors. Major flames are coming out of the north side and also the east side of the building, yes. and it was very loud explosion followed by flames, and it looks like the building is still on fire on the inside.
Which building are we talking about? The one that's westernmost?
Let's see. Yes, sir.
So it's coming out on the north side and the east side of the building in the westernmost tower.
That's correct.
You're over in Chelsea. Did you hear the explosion from
yes.
your position?
Yes, we did. As a matter of fact, we heard it, and because I was just like standing there pretty much looking out the window, I didn't see what caused it or if there was an impact.
So you have no idea right now?
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion. My God, it's right in the middle of the building.
This one into the east tower?
Yes. Yes. Right in the middle of the building. And right now, that was definitely looked like it was on purpose.
You saw a plane?
Yes, I just saw a plane go into the building.
Why do you say that was definitely on purpose?
Because it just flew straight into it. It didn't look like it was, and it didn't look like a commercial jet. It was a smaller plane. It was definitely a smaller plane.
Can you characterize the scene down there right now for us?
Now, on the...
Yeah, as you can look down to the street?
Yes.
From your vantage point?
On the second building, I think that the further one, the east side, there it looks like it's about, I would say 15 floors lower than the first building, and there's now flames coming out of that building as well. They're both completely on fire.
Now, I'm looking at what was the West Tower, and it looks like the fire on the north side of that tower is a little bit lower, but it looks like it's the same building. You're saying it was the other tower that absorbed this second impact?
That's what it looks like, exactly, from my perspective.
Don King, our director, if I could ask you to widen out and give us a shot of both towers, because we can't tell from this vantage point. Oh, okay, that is on the second tower. Yes. It is on the east tower. Teresa, hang on with us 1 second. We're gonna re-rack the tape of when we were talking to you to see if we can tell. Okay. We can't see anything. We can't see a second plane in the picture. There we see the explosion.
Yes.
There we see the explosion.
Plane that hit it.
Here we are. We're trying to re-rack the tape right now. Teresa, do you have a vantage point to the ground from where you are?
Yes, I probably could go down.
No, I'm not asking you to go down. I'm
Okay.
asking if you can see it.
Oh, no, I cannot see the ground, as a matter of fact. There's too many buildings in the way. I can probably see just up about, I would say, up a third of, I can see the top two-thirds of the building.
Uh-huh. And how much of that top two-thirds do you see flames? Do you see damage?
I would say middle of the second building and the top fourth of the first building.
Okay, Teresa, stay with us. We're going to look for that tape one more time.
Okay.
We're going to re-rack the tape here and see if we can't see a plane. Yeah, we see it right now. We see a plane right now coming in and impacting on what would appear to be the north side of that tower, of the westernmost tower, and hitting about 10 to 15 stories below. Teresa, let me ask you to hang on with us for a second while I talk with another gentleman who is an eyewitness, Richard Davis. Mr. Davis, good morning.
Good morning.
This is Bryant Gumbel.
Yes, sir.
I'm at 59th and 5th. Where are you?
I'm at 50th and 5th, but I'm facing south on the 39th floor.
You're facing south, so you have a clear vantage point.
Yes.
Talk to me about what you see, if you could.
The first plane looked like a 737. It flew right up the middle of Manhattan. It was clearly too low. I noticed it by the time it was passing the Empire State Building, and noticed that it was too low. It appeared to be absolutely nothing wrong with the plane, and then it very deliberately flew into the side of the World Trade Center.
Why do you say very deliberately?
Because the pilot aimed right for the building, and there was nothing wrong with the plane.
The plane did not appear to be in any trouble whatsoever?
None whatsoever.
And we're talking about a commercial aircraft, a 737?
It appeared to be a 737. I can't be absolutely certain.
No, obviously, I'm not asking you to be an aviation expert, but clearly what you saw, or what you say you saw, was not a small aircraft.
It was not a small aircraft. It was a small commercial aircraft, like a small Airbus or a 737 Boeing.
And that was the first
Two-engine
plane.
jet.
Did you see? We're Mr. Davis. We're looking at a tape replay of the second plane boring into the building. Hard for us to tell exactly how large an aircraft it is there, or whether or not that was intentional. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Believe me, it was intentional. We saw the second one come up the Hudson and veer into the second building.
Why do you say the second was intentional?
Because it was flown very deliberately. There appeared to be nothing wrong with the aircraft. It was flown very deliberately into the building.
Have they, you don't, obviously you're at 50th, you don't have any vantage point down there. What's everybody else talking about there who has the same vantage point? They see all the same thing you did?
Yes. Well, others did not see the first one, but there were several people in my office when the second one came in.
Yeah, we're looking at the second one boring in right now, and it does not seem to be wavering in any way or seem to be banking to avoid the tower in any way.
Let us say it could hardly be a coincidence. The two airplanes fly into the World Trade Center within minutes of each other.
Yeah.
On a clear day.
Yeah. It's a terrible scene right now.
Yes, the towers look terrible.
Wow. Wow. Miss Renault, are you still on with me? Teresa Renault?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Can you tell us if the scene has changed from your vantage point?
I would say from my vantage point right now, it's looks like there are very few flames coming out of the first tower. Still a lot of smoke. The second tower, we can still see flames coming out of the window, the north window, and a lot of smoke. A lot of smoke. The tops of the building are covered in smoke.
And from your vantage point, you can't see anything of what's happening on the ground?
No, I cannot. I hear a lot of sirens out on the street right now. One thing that you can see in the windows is all of the emergency system lights. That was one thing we could see. All of them were blinking off and on in the first tower when that happened, and I can't see them anymore. The second tower, I cannot see any emergency lights in the building blinking. All
right, I'm going to thank you both right there and pass along the word that we are getting from the FBI, that at this point the FBI is trying to confirm that this was an intentional act. At this point, it's pure speculation. Mr. Davis has told us of what he saw, and that it appeared the first plane, a large aircraft, bored into the westernmost of the two towers in intentional fashion. While we were speaking moments ago, a second plane, hard to identify the size of it, bored its way into the easternmost tower. So we have two crashes. Here's a different angle of the same plane. You see it off there on the left. Boring into there. But again, at this point, it is restricted airspace. It is a clear day. So the suspicions are high that these are intentional acts. But the FBI at this point is still trying to confirm that these are intentional acts. We have another eyewitness on the phone. Sir, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Gumbel.
How are you?
I'm fairly frightened, I have to say.
Give me your name, if you would.
My name is Frederick Schneider, sir.
Mr. Schneider, where are you?
I am on Liberty Street, which is the same street that the Trade Center's on. I'm on the south side, and the Trade Center's on the north side. My office is on the 24th floor, so I have a very clear view of exactly what happened this morning, and I've been here for about 2 hours, so I've been watching it unfold.
2 hours?
Yes. I got to my office at 7 this morning.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. But tell me about the timetable of when things started to go terribly bad this morning.
Well, Mr. Gumbel, at about 8:50 this morning, there was an explosion. I heard it first, and then my building, which is 51 stories tall, shook and rocked. And then I saw a plume of flame shoot out of the Trade Center over the Hudson River, and then I saw the plane that had crashed into the Trade Center fall down, and then it disappeared behind a building that blocks my view. There was a tremendous amount of smoke, and then it started to rain huge pieces of paper, and the paper continued to come down. At that point, all the news media started to learn about it, and I turned on my radio, and while I was still sitting at my desk, I saw a second jet, fairly large plane, fly in over the south end of Manhattan and deliberately fly directly into the Trade Center before my eyes.
Why do you say deliberately fly into the Trade Center?
Because there was no doubt in my mind that both planes were using the Trade Center as a target. They weren't in trouble. They weren't in distress. They weren't falling from the sky. They aimed for it. And they did a very good job. The Trade Center is torn open. There's a hole in the south side of the Trade Center, torn open from the impact of the plane, which fell into the street below.
Would that be the westernmost of the two towers?
The southernmost of the two towers.
Southernmost of the two towers.
Yes, yes. It's a big gaping hole in it. Flames and smoke have been pouring out since it happened about 5 minutes ago. I'm a little shaken because I saw the plane pass before my eyes. It was just about at my eye level. So.
How close to you?
A block and a half.
You say you saw the first plane fall down.
Yeah.
We're re-racking tape here, by the way, and I'm speaking to you, Mr. Schneider, but I'm showing tape right here of the second plane boring into the northernmost of the two towers. You say you saw the first plane fall down. What can you tell me about that plane?
Well, I didn't recognize it as a plane at first. It looked to me like a charred piece of metal, and I had thought that there was an explosion from within the Trade Center, so I thought what I was seeing was a piece of the Trade Center falling because the sheath of the Trade Center is metal. But since I've learned that the first explosion was caused by a plane crashing into the tower, I've assumed that what I saw was a piece of fuselage that was falling, and the plume of flame I saw shoot out would be consistent with jet fuel exploding.
So you really have no idea of how large a plane the first one was?
No, I didn't even know that was a plane. I learned that from the news media. But I definitely saw the second plane. I heard it sound, and I saw it streaming in from the south. I watched it crash into the Trade Center.
You said you're very afraid, and understandably so. They're not evacuating your building?
No. I'm going to leave on my own, but I haven't heard any decisions made to that effect.
Can you see the ground from your vantage point?
Oh, yes.
Talk to me about the scene on the ground, if you would.
Well, it's completely devoid of vehicles and people. The entire street is totally littered with paper and smoke, and several vehicles are on fire on Liberty Street in the parking lot where either fuel or pieces of the plane fell onto them after crashing into the Trade Center.
But
there's a tremendous number of emergency vehicles here and continuing to arrive. I hear sirens from every side.
All right, Mr. Schneider, you've got a great vantage point. I'm going to ask you to hold on with me for a little while, if you would.
Okay, Mr. Gomes.
I know you're anxious to get out of the building. I'm not going to keep you forever, I promise.
Okay.
But let me ask you to sit tight for a second while I go to Washington, where Jim Stewart is standing by. He's got some official reaction. Jim, good morning. What are you hearing?
Good morning, Bryant. Well, as by happenstance, I was talking to FBI headquarters at the moment this explosion took place. They saw it occur as we saw it occur, the second explosion, rather, and their reaction was the same as everyone else. Number one, they noticed the clear weather there. Number two, they noticed what appeared to be, in their eyes, a deliberate attempt to crash the aircraft into the World Trade Center. Right now, they are trying to determine whether, in fact, it was deliberate. They have no information they can share at the moment, and I get the sense that they're in the same mode that we are, simply their mouth is agape trying to figure out what's going on.
Jim, let me interrupt for just 1 second. I'm looking at a report that the FBI is investigating reports of a plane hijacking. Did you have any news of that?
No, we don't.
No confirmation of that whatsoever?
We have no confirmation
Is anybody
of
even
that.
there discussing that?
No, the only discussion that's been going on here, Brian, is that the World Trade Center has obvious symbolic value. It's been a target before of terrorism, and frankly, it would not surprise the FBI or anyone in national security if it was a target again.
Sometimes the obvious leads you to a conclusion. We're looking at two crashes, 18 minutes apart, into an obvious target, a building that has never been hit with a plane before on a clear day. What do the intelligence people there say about that?
The intelligence community for some time has been warning in a steady drumbeat, Brian, that Osama bin Laden has not been heard from now, frankly, since the beginning of the year, the USS Cole incident, rather, and they've been wondering when and if he will strike again, and they only believed it was a matter of time. And I believe that today That is going to be their first suspicion, but we have no confirmation of that. I must underline, there's no confirmation that this is a terrorist attack, number one, or number two, that it's Osama bin Laden involvement. But I can tell you right now, that is what they are thinking. That is the working premise, and we'll just have to see as the day unfolds what they discover.
Jim, as we sit here at 9:17, does the FBI have any choice but to sit and watch this on television?
I have never heard such a gasp of astonishment as I heard speaking to the FBI headquarters this morning when they saw what we saw, the explosion at the World Trade Center, the second explosion, and the smoke coming out of it. It reminded me and them of Oklahoma City. There's pure astonishment, I can tell you, at FBI headquarters this morning, and they are trying to find out the facts just as we are. Right now, they don't have any.
And as you noted, Jim, this has been a target before. Back on February 26, 93, a terrorist act at the World Trade Center killed 6 and injured more than 1,000 others. Do you know whether or not the FBI had received any warnings about attacks on domestic soil?
You know, frankly, no, and it's a question that we ask every day. I asked as recently as yesterday of the intelligence community what was the latest on terrorism threats in the United States, whether any intercepts had been picked up, whether there was any current fear here that the next target would be within the United States. The answer came back no. They were still anticipating that the next strike against American interests would be overseas somewhere. Those are the most vulnerable targets. Today would clearly be some evidence that that's not the case at all. In clear weather, as you pointed out, what appears to be a deliberate attack into the heart of the financial district in New York City. You can't pick a more explicit message to send to America if you're a terrorist than what happened today. I stress again, though, this is pure speculation, but it is speculation right now by the people who are going to have to solve this crime, if in fact it is one, Brian.
That's a good point, Jim. At this point, it is pure speculation. The only thing we can tell you is we are looking at a very clear day in Manhattan on this Tuesday morning. We are looking at 2 towers of 110 stories in height that are on fire right now, that have absorbed 2 impacts with 18 minutes apart. Certainly, it's a little more than it would be an amazing coincidence, I think we should say.
Brian,
go ahead.
We've just been told that, and this should not be come as a surprise, it's standard procedure by the FBI. Their rapid deployment team from the Washington field office, this is a group of people that they send to major disaster and terrorist incidents, such as the twin embassy bombings in Africa. They have now been dispatched to New York. I have reason to believe, too, that some members of the HRT, that's the hostage rescue team, have been put on alert. We don't have any word yet that they would be sent. And these are standard procedures that would take place anytime a major terrorist incident occurs. But this would be a group of approximately 60 experts, people who are very good at picking up the bits of debris that we've been talking about falling on the streets of New York and turning that into evidence should they discover that this, in fact, was a deliberate act.
Jim, and if you don't know the answer to this, I understand, so I apologize up front for asking you. But do you know whether or not there are any federal offices in the World Trade Center at the upper level?
I don't know that there are. I do not believe that there are. I believe that the FBI and the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms people, are all closer to Midtown. But I don't know the precise answer to that.
So, in fact, if the buildings were targeted intentionally, this would be more symbolic than a direct attack on the federal government or its employees. Jim, let me ask you to sit tight for a second. I understand, Mr. Davis, you're back with me on the line?
I am.
And Miss Renault, you're also back on the line?
Sure.
Mr. Davis, bring us up to speed. What are you seeing? Anything changed?
No, but the smoke is getting thicker, and I can see flames from some of the windows on the first tower. My view of the second tower is somewhat obstructed.
Where are you, 50th and 5th?
I'm 50th and 5th.
Yeah. The officials there are anxious to in any way evacuate your building? Or is this just a normal work day?
I've been told that Rockefeller Center is putting into effect security measures, but we have not been told to evacuate.
Okay. And Miss Renault, what are you seeing right now?
From the southeast tower, there are still flames coming out of the north side of the building. It may be just my perspective, but it looks like something could be sticking out of that. Also, it looks like on the northwest tower that there's possibly, the fire and everything could have moved up because it seems to be that there's smoke coming out higher floors on the building.
You say there appears to be something out. That would be the second aircraft?
Yes.
The one at the lower level?
Yes.
And what actually do you see?
There's an object that doesn't fit with the line of the building that seems to be protruding, and that's what's on fire.
We're getting a look at the building right now, and I must say the smoke seems to be obscuring our view enough so that we can't identify it. We're re-racking the tape right now. You see encircled there off on the right-hand side of your screen, this is the second plane. Obviously, the first plane has already collided with the top of the southernmost building, and now here comes the second plane. And you see, making no moves to evade the second tower, and then crashing into the second one. Ms. Renault, let me ask you to sit tight. Mr. Davis, you too, for a second. I want to go to Washington, where White House correspondent Bill Plant is standing by. Bill, what are you hearing on your end?
Brian, we're hearing that the president will have a statement to make shortly. He is in Florida this morning. He was supposed to do an educational event with children to push his education bill. We understand that that event has been canceled. There was a senior staff meeting here this morning. Nobody seems quite to know exactly what's going on. The National Security Council said earlier that it had heard nothing unusual. This was after the first airplane impact. We will hear from the president, we think, very shortly, to hear what he has to say and see what, if anything, they know about this, which appears to be so deliberate.
Bill, I asked Jim this earlier, and again, I apologize if you're not in a position to shed any more light on it, but do you know whether or not officials there at the White House had been forewarned that there was an imminent attack or there was a heightened sense of alert? We're aware there had been for some time a heightened sense of alert throughout the Mideast, but I'm talking about domestically.
Well, we do know that there has been a heightened sense of alert. We do know that there have been a number of threats. There are always threats received. They have tended to take them recently a bit more seriously. But it does not appear, and I hesitate to make this for certain, but it does not appear that they had any advance warning that anything was going to happen today.
Again, this is all speculative, Bill, but are officials there working on the assumption that two planes crashing in the Twin Towers 18 minutes apart on a clear day, not an accident?
Hard to believe that they would think otherwise, but at the moment they seem just as mystified as we are. And as I said before, we do expect this statement from the president, who is down in Florida, sometime within the next few minutes.
All right, Bill, let me go back to Teresa Renault. Ms. Renault, I'm sorry I'd cut you off earlier, and I may again, by the way, if the president is ready to speak, but give us what you see from your vantage point again, if you would.
From the southeast building.
You're in Chelsea, correct?
Yes, I am. On the 14th floor, we have a 360-degree view. It's completely clear, straight shot. We have on the southeast building on the north side, looks like the north corner, about the middle of the building. It is still very much in flames and smoke rising from that. I can't see as many flames coming out of the northwest building. It looks like, though, that the north side of the building and the west side of the northwest building have been opened up and still very much covered in smoke in the tops of the buildings.
And that the northwest side would be the building that absorbed the first impact, the higher of the two.
That's correct.
From our vantage point, it appears that the higher hole is a larger hole. Is that what you see?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I don't know if that's just a difference in perspective from where I am, because that is the closer building
Certainly
to me.
It's staggered. You're correct.
Yes.
But we had heard an earlier report, unconfirmed, that the first plane appeared to be a 737. The plane we saw, yes, absent any perspective, seemed to be a smaller plane.
I would say the explosion upon impact was much larger on the first hit than the second.
You heard both?
Yes, I saw the impact on the second building. I saw the explosion come from the building on the first one. Mm-hmm.
You're at Chelsea and 14th.
Yes. It's like a 16th and 8th Avenue.
Yeah, I'm sorry, on the 14th floor. I apologize.
Yeah,
not on 14th. You're a considerable ways away. Any effort there to evacuate your building?
Not at this point. No.
Mr. Davis, tell us the mood where you are. We were talking to a gentleman earlier who was in a high-rise closer to the World Trade Center, and he was genuinely afraid, and understandably so.
Well, it is shocking. Very shocking to have witnessed. Perhaps we can be somewhat more sympathetic to what Israel is suffering at the moment.
But they have not moved people out of your building?
No.
You said you're at Rockefeller Center, that security actions have been put into place. What do those entail?
I really do not know, but we have not been told to evacuate.
All right. Jim Stewart, back in Washington, you still with us? Oh, Bill, you're still with us, right?
I am, Brian.
What word are you hearing on when the president's going to come forward?
We were just told that the president will have something to say down in Florida any minute. He is in Florida. We believe that his education event, which was scheduled for this morning, has been canceled. But the White House is saying that the president will have something to say. Then he'll leave Florida and come right back to Washington, Brian.
Bill, had his people, Condi Rice, Colin Powell, his security people, his foreign affairs people, ever discussed this kind of a scenario?
I don't know for certain, but I would be very surprised if they had not talked about it. This kind of what-if disaster planning is a staple in Washington, and particularly at senior levels. And I think that these sorts of things are gamed, examined, and talked about, and everyone hopes they will never happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, in this case, it would seem to have gone against hopes. Again, let's bring everyone up to speed. As best we can tell, wow, we just had another view of the second plane going in. As best we can tell, at 8:45 this morning, an aircraft plowed into the uppermost levels of one of the Twin Towers. An eyewitness has defined that plane, has told us that plane was a 737, but that is unconfirmed. And then moments later, 18 minutes later, a second aircraft, the one you saw just there, plowed into the other Twin Tower at a lower level. That plane, we have no idea of its size. We have no idea if these were intentional acts. We have no idea if these are private planes or commercial aircraft. We have an unconfirmed report from the Associated Press that the FBI was investigating reports of a plane hijacking shortly before the crash into the World Trade Center. Let's go to Florida. President Bush has a statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Pace and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
We've been watching President Bush, who was down in Florida for what was supposed to be an educational event. Instead, he is racing back to Washington as we speak. The president making a very brief statement in Sarasota, calling it an apparent terrorist attack on our nation. Again, that is unconfirmed, and promising the full resources of the federal government to not only help the victims but also to investigate. And before asking people to pray with him, the president saying that this act will not stand. As he was speaking, we got a report from Reuters that a plane was hijacked from Boston. A plane out of Boston was hijacked. But again, that is unconfirmed. We had a report earlier from the Associated Press that there had been a hijacking. Now Reuters is reporting that a plane out of Boston was hijacked. An American Airlines aircraft, we understand, was the plane that was hijacked. This would be in keeping with an earlier eyewitness report that the first plane that plowed into the World Trade Center was a 737. Former FBI agent James Kallstrom covered the World Trade Center bombing back in 1993. He is with us on the line right now. Jim, good morning.
Good morning.
You've been watching this. Talk to me.
I shouldn't say good morning. It's not a good morning.
No, I apologize. Go ahead.
I don't really know much about it, but it sure looks to me like a deliberate act of terrorism. And I mourn the loss of the lives that I'm sure are going to follow this.
I've got a lot of questions for you, James. Let me kind of take you through them if I could. Because you investigated and worked on the original terrorist incident, I should say the terrorist incident back in 1993, can you tell me if these buildings have any special significance by virtue of who's working in them?
Well, I don't think it's so much who's working them. I think the towers symbolize largely. There's many other symbols also, but the World Trade Center is a symbol. That was one of the original reasons that Ramzi Youssef and the rest of that gang wanted to do the World Trade Center as a symbol of America. So, sure, there's other symbols, but I think this is probably the tallest one on the East Coast.
Again, all of this is unconfirmed. We heard the president call it an apparent terrorist attack. At this moment, have you any doubt that's exactly what it is?
No, I have no doubt of that. I would call it an apparent attack. I think there's probably an infinitesimal chance it isn't, but it certainly doesn't appear that it could be. Commercial airline is number one, are not going to direct themselves into a square hit on the World Trade Center. If there's some sort of a mayday or something wrong with the plane, they're going to try to ditch it elsewhere. They're not going to do that. And if the reports of a second plane hitting the building are true, then I think that probably caps off exactly what this is. It's a cowardly act of terrorism.
How restricted is the airspace around the World Trade Center?
I'm not an FAA person, but no, you cannot fly through that airspace unless you're a helicopter, unless you're anything really, without being guided by air traffic control. It's highly restrictive.
So the possibility that two planes on a clear day just happened to wander into these buildings.
I think that's beyond the pale.
Yeah, that's not a possibility. Again, you worked on evacuating these buildings. You saw what happened when they were evacuated. How many people are we talking about from what you can see on those upper levels?
Do we know exactly what time this first event happened?
We're guessing. We're putting it at about 8:45, Mr. Kallstrom.
Yeah, I think
again, that's only by eyewitnesses.
Yeah, Brian, I think we're talking literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people affected by this. I mean, the smoke alone in the other floors and the when you compare the bombing in the basement of that building, which for a number of hours we weren't sure it was a bomb. We thought maybe it was some sort of a transformer blowing up, to what's reported at least as a 737 type size airplane, something that size, hitting the first tower, and then some smaller plane hitting the second. I mean, this is geometrically more catastrophic.
Difficult building to extraordinary, obviously, because of the height of the buildings. But the plans in place for evacuation, are they, from your experience, state of the art?
I think they are. I think the whole security of that building, both from a physical security standpoint and from an evacuation standpoint, was certainly reinvented and looked after that tragedy that happened back in the early 90s. And they're probably as good as they can be. But having said that, you're talking about one of the tallest structures, or two of the tallest structures in the United States. And whether or not the elevators are working, they're probably not. They're not used in case of fire. You've got a massive evacuation problem on your hands.
Would it be highly unusual, Mr. Kallstrom, for these attacks, if that's what they were, to have taken place without some degree of advance warning?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, the FBI and law enforcement, the people that come to work every day and suffer through immense criticism when little things go wrong, these are the days that everyone hopes that they have a very formidable, highly motivated FBI and law enforcement team. And I suspect we do. And these are the things that they try to not have happen. These are the things they try to have the intelligence to avoid happening. International terrorism, if that is what this is, and I don't know what it is very hard to penetrate because it's not very, it doesn't have a hierarchy of authority, and it's cellular, and it's a lot of different people motivated for religious type reasons, hatred reasons, and you can necessarily not know a lot about what's going on in an agency if you're in at some level because it's so segmented. Again,
I'm getting a report now that it was a United Airlines plane that plowed into the building. We don't know whether that negates the American Airlines reported hijacking or whether or not that was a second plane. So at this point, we're getting different reports. Go ahead, Mr. Kelso.
Yeah, I mean, you telling me that, Brian, if that is a commercial airline, a United or American or whatever it is, you know, that, I mean, my initial thought there is that this plane was somehow commandeered by somebody, hijacked, taken over, and flown into the building. I don't know that for a fact, but that's certainly what it looks like.
Yeah, as I'm looking at the second tape right here, and I don't know if you're watching on the line with us, that is definitely a commercial-sized aircraft.
Yeah.
Now that we've blown it up.
Yeah.
In size.
You know, it's beyond belief, but it's not beyond belief. I mean, we've seen this hatred find its way into the embassy bombings in Africa. We've seen this hatred at the USS Cole. We've seen it at the World Trade Center in '93. We've seen it around the world in acts that take place almost every day. And, you know, for this to then transform itself into this size of an incredible tragedy, to me, although I certainly would never expect it, never ever want it to happen, is not that unbelievable.
Yeah, James Kallstrom, let me ask you to sit tight for a second, if you would. Brian Jenkins, a terrorism expert who's been with us quite a few times, as I understand, on the line. Brian, you there?
Yes, I am.
Talk to me.
Well, obviously, you know, we don't know the details of what happened yet. We should have details coming out fairly quickly, though, as to the identity of this aircraft. We're talking about crowded airspace in New York with major airports in the area, both in the immediate area of New York and in the surrounding cities. There should be information fairly quickly that will identify these particular aircraft. And indeed, we should be able to confirm fairly quickly as to the identity of the jet, and perhaps even some last second broadcast that may indicate what happened.
Mr. Jenkins, I'm going to interrupt for just one second because we're getting word that they are evacuating the White House down in Washington right now.
Well, this is not surprising. I mean, first of all, an action of this magnitude is something that does suggest a great deal of planning and preparation. In some of these recent actions, we have seen multiple coordinated operations.
But who's capable of this kind of planning and preparation?
There are a number of terrorist organizations around the world that would be capable of this, based primarily in the Middle East. But it's too early, really, to speculate as to the identity. Certainly,
but there any doubt in your mind that what we're looking at here is the aftermath of a coordinated terrorist incident?
You know, to explain. In any as happenstance.
Hold it, Mr. Jenkins. We're looking. There are two jets right now approaching the World Trade Center. We're watching. Hold on. I'm sorry. No, the one aircraft is cleared. We can't tell whether it was a plane or a chopper from our vantage point. I apologize, Mr. Jenkins.
No, that's okay.
We're more than a bit gun shy. We're seeing aircraft off to the right side of our picture. We're going to assume at this point that is a copter or is aircraft to get a better vantage point. But having seen one go plow in for a second time, we're a little bit wary. Go ahead. I apologize.
Of course, but the issue here is that the presumption has to be made that there could be yet further pieces to this operation that haven't yet unfolded. While this itself is certainly one of the most ambitious terrorist attacks that we have seen, certainly, we have seen in the recent past coordinated attacks, even attacks taking place in different cities within minutes.
Let me
of
ask you to sit there. James Kallstrom, you still with me?
Be with you for another minute or so, Brian.
Okay. The White House has been evacuated. Is that action that's normally taken as precautionary an attack like this, or is that in direct response, you would think, to a specific threat?
Brian, I would say none of this is normal.
No, you know what I meant.
And I think probably just knowing a little bit that I know, sitting outside now and seeing what's happened here, I think that's probably very prudent.
I'm looking, Mr. Kallstrom and Mr. Jenkins, I'll tell you as we alert everyone else, that I'm looking at a report here from Reuters that a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. We're looking at a live picture from Washington, and there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. It would appear that there has been another major explosion, this one in the nation's capital. You are looking at a scene of apparent blast aftermath. There is smoke in the air over the Pentagon. We don't know whether this is the result of a bomb or whether it is yet another aircraft that has targeted a symbol of the United States power, but there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. This is coming at 9:43 Eastern Time. And we understand that there's a bomb at a heliport being reported. As I note all this, there is a report that I'm looking at from Reuters that a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility for the New York World Trade Center plane attacks. Abu Dhabi Television is reporting that it received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, claiming responsibility for crashing 2 planes into the World Trade Center buildings. And Qatar-based Al Jazeera Television is saying that FBI sources are saying that one of the 2 aircraft had been hijacked. Mr. Jenkins, are you still with me? What's this Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine?
This is a Palestinian group whose history goes back into the late 60s. It's the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Certainly, they have not carried out anything on this scale. No terrorist group has carried out anything on this scale, but certainly haven't carried out anything like this, terrorist activity like this in many, many years. However, I'd be very, very cautious at this point about any telephone claims. Once these events occur, what we've seen is 2 things. Number one, in many cases, there is no credible claim of responsibility from the actual perpetrators. And second, there are often many false claims by groups once information like this goes out.
Let me just pass along some information. In New York, all airports, Newark, JFK, LaGuardia, all airports have been closed, as have all tunnels leading to New Jersey and Queens, and all bridges. All airports, tunnels, and bridges have been closed. Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Kallstrom, while you're there, let me just try to do a recap, if I might, because we're looking at just about 1 hour ago when all this began. It began when a plane, still an unidentified aircraft, plowed into one of the 2 towers of the World Trade Center, creating a hole, the larger of the 2 that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. 18 minutes after that, as we were dealing with that explosion, you see a second plane, appeared to be a commercial aircraft, bored into, there it is again, bored into the second of the 2 towers at a lower level. At this point, we do not have any confirmation of casualties or injuries, or even confirmation that these planes were hijacked. Nonetheless, we do have a couple of reports, one from AP, one from Reuters, reporting that an American Airlines plane was hijacked, that a United Airlines plane was hijacked, supposedly one of those 2 planes hijacked out of Boston. Within about 45 or 50 minutes after that first attack, we saw smoke pouring out of the Pentagon in the nation's capital. There's the scene right there. Again, at this point, we don't know if that's the result of a bombing or we don't know if it's the result of a plane attack. The president right now is on his way back from Florida. He had gone there for an educational event. He came forward, had a couple of things to say to the nation. In a brief remarks, he said this was an apparent terrorist attack on our country, promised the full resources of the government to help those who were injured by the attack and to investigate the attack. He said, before leading people in prayer, that this will not stand. The president is heading back to the White House, but we can tell you at this point that the White House has been evacuated or is in the process of being evacuated. And here in New York, everybody is, of course, on full alert. All airports, tunnels, and bridges have been closed. Mr. Kallstrom, are you still with me?
Yeah, I can.
I know you've got to get out of there. Any final comments from your end?
No, just a tragic day. I agree with the comments about. I don't think we should jump to any conclusions as to who did this. I think it's largely irrelevant for the public at this point. There are a lot of false claims and misclaims and no claims and after all, this is such a massive attack that full retaliation will be in the cards. So the notion of someone standing up and saying they actually did this, I would have to put great doubt at that at this point.
Former New York FBI Director James Kallstrom. Jim, thank you.
Thank you.
We can add right now to the list of evacuated, we told you earlier the White House was in the process of or had been evacuated. We understand the same can now be said of the U.S. Capitol and the U.S. Treasury building. Brian Jenkins, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
You heard Mr. Kallstrom talking about responding to this kind of an attack, if that's what it was. That's something easily said. Is it doable?
Well, it is doable. The question is, first of all, though it's far too early to talk about what it may be possible to do in response. I mean, clearly, an action like this will provoke some type of response, but then that really requires first figuring out who did it, and then figuring out what the appropriate response is.
Can you play
So
process of
it's
elimination
early for this.
in answering who did it? Can you not eliminate some possibilities because they did not have the resources, the coordination, the expertise to do this?
You know, you have to be very, very careful both about jumping to conclusions as to who to blame and ruling out people prematurely. Many, many years ago, analysis of something like this used to be easier because we dealt with a number of identifiable terrorist organizations, each of which had its own identifiable capabilities and modus operandi. Today, it is a much more fluid organization from universes of like-minded fanatics. These various conspiracies are put together. And so, in fact, if we drop back to the plot that was discovered just before the Millennium celebrations in the United States, that involved some Algerians who, in turn, are believed to have been connected to Osama bin Laden. You know, one sees these assemblies of conspiracies that may involve many actors.
Again, a further note, and we're getting this as it comes in. We understand now we're getting a report that the FAA has halted all takeoffs, all traffic nationwide, that all aircraft are grounded. Obviously, there are those aircraft in the air. If they're bound for New York, they're going to arrive and find airports closed. But whether or not those in the air are going to be brought down to the nearest facility as soon as possible is still unclear. Is there a standard procedure amid all this, Mr. Jenkins? Mr. Jenkins, you still with me? Evidently, we've lost our line to Brian Jenkins. Let's just bring you up to speed on the picture you're seeing on your screen. On the left is the World Trade Center. We have smoke billowing out of both towers. It has been for over an hour now. We also have smoke coming out of a portion of the Pentagon on the right-hand side of your screen. That has been going on for about 10 or 15 minutes. It would seem that the United States on this day is under attack from terrorists, that the first aircraft was the first blow in that attack. It was an aircraft that an eyewitness has described to us as a 737. It struck the World Trade Center at its upper levels at 8:45 or within minutes of that this morning. And then 18 minutes after that, there was this frightening scene of a second aircraft plowing into the other tower on the southern tip of Manhattan. When visibility was perfect for flying, it would seem that both aircraft were directly targeting the World Trade Center, a building that has, or a facility that was the scene of a terrorist attack back in 1993. That attack killed 6 and left over 1,000 injured. Although we have no reports of casualties, it would seem that we can expect those numbers to be much, much worse today. Shortly after that attack, the president came forward in Florida with a brief address to the nation promising the full resources and saying this will not stand. And then he is flying back to Washington. Once he gets there, he'll find the White House, the Capitol, and the Treasury have been evacuated, is ablaze. Victimized again by yet another attack, this one in the nation's capital. That one came at about 9:30 Eastern Time. Bill Plant is standing by with us at the White House or thereabouts. Bill, where are you and what are you getting?
Hello?
Bill? Bill Plant is standing by. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get our communication through with him. We are getting a report here. I'm looking. Paul Begala, Democratic consultant to Bill Clinton, is being quoted on the wire as saying he witnessed the explosion near the Pentagon shortly after 2 planes crashed in the World Trade Center. He says it was a huge fireball, a huge orange fireball, and he says another witness told him that a helicopter exploded. He is saying that another witness told him a helicopter exploded. Let's go to Bill Plant. Bill can't hear me, but I understand we can get his audio. So let's go ahead and signal Bill to tell us what he's got.
Bill Plant in Washington. I am across the street from the White House on the other side of Lafayette Park, approximately 1 block away. They have evacuated the entire White House staff and the staff of the old executive office building next door. We understand that the Treasury is also being evacuated. There's a lot of activity, fire trucks, ambulances, but as far as we know, there is no damage in the White House complex. I repeat, no damage that we know of in the White House complex. But this was in response to damage elsewhere, to the New York aircraft incidents and to whatever it was that happened at the Pentagon. But this is a full alert. The Secret Service has moved everybody away from the White House grounds, away from the White House complex. And they keep telling us that we have to remain a block away. There are fire trucks going by, ambulances going by, headed we know not where. But this is obviously a precautionary measure because no one clearly knows what to expect next. Right?
All right, Bill Plant. And again, Bill is unable to hear us. We were able to get his audio in here, but as you can imagine, it is I'm sure a frantic scene down in the nation's capital this morning, as it is here in New York, as we've been watching down at the southern tip of Manhattan. Jane Clayson is with me here in New York, and I apologize for talking throughout, but you've been watching. Go ahead, Jane.
Well, I just wonder how many people are in the building right now. We haven't been able to assess if people have been coming out of the building, if there have been people on the ground. One man reportedly had some burns from some debris that had fallen from the building, but we still haven't been able to assess if there are injuries, or obviously there are many hundreds or if not thousands of people affected, says James Kallstrom, formerly of the FBI, but we still don't know that, and that's one looming question.
Yeah, I mean, you at this point, you hate to jump to conclusions and you don't want to throw numbers around, but if, and again, I put if in capital letters, if we are talking about 2 commercial aircraft plowing into the World Trade Center during business hours or shortly before the business day begins at 9 a.m., we are talking about some considerable numbers of dead and injured.
And not just at the World Trade Center, now at the Pentagon in Washington as well.
Also at the Pentagon. And we're looking at a list of some of the businesses on the upper levels of the World Trade Center, and none of them have any affiliation with the government. But again, the World Trade Center isn't necessarily a government building. It is there's U.S. Customs above the 70th floor, but the World Trade Center, more than anything, is a symbol of the United States, a symbol of U.S. progress, a symbol of U.S. might, located as it is down at the heart of Wall Street. And so if in fact it was targeted, it was because of its symbolic value. Producer Laura Shane was by the Pentagon when it was hit. Let's go there again. She can't hear us, but she can speak with us. Laura, somebody cue her.
Hello. Hello.
All right. Obviously, we're having problems with Laura Shane's audio. Again, at this point, we don't know whether that Pentagon explosion was the result of an aircraft crashing into it or a bomb that was deployed near there. We had an unconfirmed report that it was a helicopter that had crashed into the building. You can still see some flames down there in the lower right-hand corner. Now we are getting a report that they believe it was a plane. But again, we do not have any confirmation of that, nor do we have any idea what the numbers involved here are.
These are the first scenes from the ground, it appears.
Yeah, these are scenes from near the Pentagon in the nation's capital. We don't know how close to the Pentagon these are. Obviously, that is not the Pentagon in the background, so we're talking of a neighboring area. We're not getting any numbers at this point. We do know that an FBI team has been dispatched from the nation's capital to investigate what has gone on at the World Trade Center, but at this point, our information is sketchy. Looking at a report here now, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center was a hijacked aircraft that had taken off from Boston, supposedly an American Airlines Boeing 767 out of Logan. This is the second aircraft. We don't know whether or not this aircraft was, as earlier reported, a United Airlines aircraft. We are also getting word out of Chicago that the Sears Tower, the tallest structure in that city, has been evacuated. Before we have to step aside, as we're getting another look at the second attack, we understand a Pentagon witness is with us in Washington. Good morning. This is Bryant Gumbel in New York. Could you identify yourself, please? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself for me?
Yes, my name is Jim Dorsett.
And Jim, how close are you to the Pentagon? Okay, we're obviously having some problems making that connection with the eyewitness in Washington. We have just a minute left. Let's go ahead and recount what we do know. At 8:45 Eastern Time on a clear day on the southern tip of Manhattan, not one but two aircraft plowed into the World Trade Center. We don't know at this point if they were private aircraft. We don't know if it was intentional. All we do know is that they appeared to be commercial aircraft. These come amid reports of hijacking. Shortly after that, about an hour after that, there was an explosion at the Pentagon. At this point, the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol, and the Treasury have been evacuated in Washington. In New York, all airports, tunnels, and bridges have been closed, and in Chicago, the Sears Tower has been evacuated. We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2. With that, we will leave you and turn it over to Dan Rather.
This is CBS News continuing live coverage of the apparent terrorist attacks today here in New York City and in Washington, D.C. It's important to say these things at the very beginning. There is much that is not known about what is happening. The second thing is that the word from almost everybody who's trying to deal with the situation, the word of the day is steady. Steady. Yes, there have been some terrible things happening, but until and unless we know the facts, it's very difficult to draw many conclusions. Now, here's what we know. Just before 9 Eastern Time this morning, a plane crashed into one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center along the Hudson River here in New York. A few minutes later, a second plane crashed into the other tower. Both skyscrapers are on fire. Evacuations have been underway for a long while. There are known injuries. How many? Much too soon to know, and whether there's any death or not, it is too soon to know. Yes, there are widespread assumptions that there must be death, but there are no confirmed fatalities. Now, in Washington, the Pentagon has had a fire and explosions, much speculation of what would have caused the fires and explosions at the Pentagon in Washington, but very few facts. David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent, says that he has seen, I believe it said 5 injured people at the Pentagon. One eyewitness, and only one so far, is quoted as saying he thinks, I put that in quotation marks, he thinks a plane crashed into the Pentagon. But there'll be rumors all day, and we're going to try to separate the rumors from the facts. Now, you're looking at a live picture of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in flames with much smoke. In the last few minutes, there have been 2 reports, but not yet officially confirmed, that a portion of at least one of the towers has collapsed. But I caution that that's an unconfirmed report, although it comes from 2 sources, and it's unclear whether that collapse is about the interior of the building or some portion of the exterior of the building. I want to emphasize again, not to be redundant, but this is a day in which rumors are going to spread like mildew in damp basements. And there'll be reports, some of them will be officially confirmed, some not. That's the environment in which we're dealing. Now, President Bush was in Florida this morning. He called this an apparent act of terrorism and rushed back to Washington. The president is in the air going back to Washington at the moment. Now, in Washington, the report spread that a plane also crashed at the Pentagon. See, as David Martin says, there are at least several injuries. Several is the word he used. The FAA has banned all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. Here in New York, the city is on a full terrorist alert. Bridges and tunnels are closed. You recall the World Trade Center was the target of a terrorist bombing in 1993. Now, again, it's important to point out that with television, what we can show you is what is at the end of the television camera. The whole city is not in smoke and flames, not by a long shot. The city is on a terrorist alert. Entry into the city has been closed off. Tunnels and bridges are closed off as a precautionary measure. But, you know, in many, many areas of New York City, life goes on this morning, and the same is true in Washington, D.C. So just keep in mind that when you see this picture constantly, it's of one section of New York City, and we go to Washington for the picture there, the Pentagon, the same thing. These pictures are not in real time. As you can see, that made it look like that the flames were spreading. This picture steadied now. For those of you familiar with the city, the World Trade Center at the end of Manhattan Island, 2 twin towers. Apparently, 2 aircraft, one hit into one of the towers and then another hit into the other tower. What kind of aircraft were they? We simply do not know what kind of planes they were. Witnesses described them as, quote, large aircraft. Yes, you may have heard reports, but the reports are unconfirmed, that there was one aircraft that had been hijacked. There continue to be reports. I'm pausing, taking in information as I speak to you. There are increasing reports that on one of the World Trade Center towers, that portions of the tower have collapsed. Now, this would not be surprising to have this proven to be true, given the smoke and flames that have been pouring out of these buildings for what now, well over an hour. I want to underscore again that both towers have been hit. Both towers, each tower was hit by an aircraft, incoming aircraft. The origin of the aircraft, what kind of planes, unknown. I was saying before there have been these reports, but the reports are unconfirmed, that an aircraft in the Eastern Air Corridor may have been hijacked this morning and may have been one of the planes that crashed in the World Trade Center. None of that is confirmed. CBS News veteran correspondent Harold Dow is on the telephone now from a section of the city where these twin towers are in flames and smoke. Harold, if you hear us, come in.
Yeah, I arrived on the scene about an hour and a half ago, and believe it or not, there was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it, came down, sending smoke and debris everywhere. I had to do all I could to run to get away from all the debris. Me and a number of other people here are trapped in the subway here in a shoe store, actually trying to get away from most of the debris. It's just an incredible sight. They had a lot of emergency workers around the building, and of course everybody's hoping that these people were able to get out of there without being injured. But it is a surreal and devastating scene over here, something like I've never seen before.
Harold, exactly where are you in filing this report?
Dan, I'm at a subway station. I just ran down the stairs. I didn't even look at it. It's right around the corner from the World Trade Center, and I'm kind of waiting for that smoke and debris to blow away to go back upstairs. But it's just an unbelievable situation here.
Well, Harold, if I may, take a deep breath, take a series of deep breaths, and then let me ask you, have you seen any indication that would tend to confirm these reports, which have been growing in intensity, that a section of the World Trade Center has collapsed onto the street below. Do you see any confirmation of that in any direction?
That is true, Dan. That's what we were all running from. We heard the building coming down, and that's what we were running from. Literally, people ran out of their shoes trying to get out of the way of this thing.
Well, one can certainly understand that. So Harold Dow, our man on the scene, reports that he can confirm that a section, we do not know how large a section of one of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed into the street below. Now, for those of you who are joining us in progress, it's Dan Rather at CBS News World Headquarters in New York with Russ Mitchell at my side here, covering a breaking news situation. 2 airplanes, one just before 9 o'clock Eastern Time, the other shortly later. One each crashed into one each of the World Trade Center buildings here in New York. Something, we know not exactly what has happened at the Pentagon in Washington. There are unconfirmed reports that a plane crashed into the Pentagon and started a large fire there. There have been some people injured at the Pentagon. How many, we do not know. David Martin on the scene at the Pentagon says he saw several people injured. There are other, and I repeat, totally unconfirmed reports of Pentagon that it wasn't a plane that went into the Pentagon, it was a helicopter, and then there are yet third versions of this that say a plane and a helicopter may have crashed into the Pentagon. But all of that is in the area of unconfirmed. Fact, something started to fire with some explosion at the Pentagon not long after the 2 World Trade Centers were hit by separate aircraft. Mika Brzezinski is downtown. Mika?
Yep. Hi, Mika Brzezinski here reporting from PS 89. It's near the scene of the now collapse of what we believe to be the Tower Number 1 of the World Trade Center. I was standing with CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts. We were coordinating our crews in a crowd of people near the corner of Murray Avenue and the West Side Highway when the collapse occurred, and literally plumes of smoke and gases as the collapse happened, I'm sure you're seeing in the video, began to roll our way, and that is when the crowd went wild. People just began to run. Our live trucks shut down, crews were running, reporters were running, people were running, and the cops literally were just waving their arms saying, go, go, go. We are inside the school right now, actually inside a small room, trying to stay clear of the crowds that are trying to get out of the way, and also the evacuation of this school. School officials here are trying to get everybody out of the building in an orderly fashion as quickly as possible. But again, there is so much confusion out on the street. It is literally chaos out there. We've got a short timeline here. The school right now is now putting on the intercom where kids need to go to assemble classes near Chambers Street. They're trying to organize the classes and get these kids out of here as safely as possible. Right now we're dealing with the air because of the plumes of smoke and gases. Byron pointed out to me we needed to move quickly because the smoke that was rolling our way and the debris as well was very thick and it could be very dangerous. It was already a chaotic situation before the collapse happened, and this is just piling more danger and damage on top of what was already a very chaotic situation. We're dealing with a wide range of emotions out here on the street as well. You've got typical New Yorkers. I actually ran with my producer, Mike Noble, about a mile to get here before we hopped onto a golf cart and got someone to bring us right up to the scene. And what we saw were people who were walking nonchalantly. It's New York, kind of looking back at what they could see, and others completely upset, crying. One woman had to get off her bike because she was so upset. I think a lot of people in a situation like this, even if they're not close to it, all of a sudden feel that fear. They feel that maybe this was deliberate. What is happening in our city? But in a sense right now, we are dealing with a situation where 2 planes hit the World Trade Towers, one after the other. We're not necessarily sure how and why it happened. You've got some witnesses saying that they saw one of the planes, I believe the DC-3, or maybe it was the smaller plane. I think it was the smaller plane that appeared to be flying directly toward the tower, but no one can be sure right now. What we've got is hundreds of ambulances, hundreds of fire crews. I mean, I could not count the fire trucks and the crews that passed us as I was running to the scene, blaring their sirens, trying to get there as quickly as possible, trying to get to those injured and to the casualties. At this point, nobody knows how many casualties, but it appears there will be some. Back to you.
Mika Brzezinski reporting from the area of Manhattan where you see these smoke and flames. The two twin World Trade Centers hit this morning separately by aircraft. Now, let me underscore that New York is not burning. One section of New York has had a terrible thing happen, what President Bush has called an apparent terrorist attack. And in Washington, D.C., an apparent terrorist attack. I underscore the word apparent terrorist attack on the Pentagon. CBS News veteran Defense Department correspondent David Martin is on the telephone from the area. David, do you hear us?
The White House.
We're having some difficulty bringing in David Martin. These pictures from outside the Pentagon are of people who were injured in the explosion and fire. There, we're trying to bring in David Martin, who is on the grounds of the Pentagon. As you might well understand, cell phone traffic has been extremely busy this morning, so busy that it makes it difficult to get any cell phone communication in Manhattan, New York, and for that matter in Washington itself. So while we try to get David Martin up, you're looking at a live picture from the Pentagon in Washington. Keep in mind, two airplanes hit one each of the Twin Towers World Trade Centers in New York, and in the Pentagon, nobody knows what started it. Nobody knows for sure what started it. Apparently, a plane and or a helicopter was flown into the Pentagon, but that's not been confirmed. There was an explosion and fire in the Pentagon. These pictures have to do with casualties injured at the Pentagon. If anybody has been killed, we are not yet aware of it. We go to Jim Stewart in our Washington Bureau. Jim?
And here in Washington, the police now have closed down the Capitol, the House and Senate. They have closed down the Justice Department. The World Bank has been emptied. We are told that the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington now is on full alert with the anticipation that there could be additional targets if in fact someone is targeting sites in the nation's capital. We are told that the FAA has grounded all flights, all domestic flights in the United States. One building that has not closed down is the FBI. The FBI has established an emergency command post in the center of its building. It's a contained area that is presumably safe from bombs, they believe, and FBI officials have been there now for the last 2 hours trying to sort out exactly what is going on. I can tell you, Dan, that the working theory here is that this is the work of terrorists. They specifically believe this is the work of Osama bin Laden. This is pure speculation at the moment. As recently as yesterday, Dan, when we were making our rounds on what the latest terrorist threats were in the United States and abroad, there was no hint whatsoever that there was a threat against any domestic target in the United States. There had not been any domestic intercepts of messages. There had been no sense that there were people here who should not be here. The feeling was that there were threats against targets overseas, but not here in the United States. They tell me, frankly, that there is a roadmap, a blueprint, if you will, for precisely what happened today. And that was signed by Ramzi Youssef. This is the bomber who was involved in the World Trade Center originally and who had plans to hijack aircraft and target buildings in the United States, specifically the CIA. Mr. Youssef, of course, was captured by the FBI. He's incarcerated here in the United States. But this is precisely the game plan that was talked out some 7 to 8 years ago by terrorists associated with Osama bin Laden. One note of concern here at the FBI already is that their field office, Dan, in New York is located at 26th and Federal. That is very, very close to the World Trade Center. Judging from the pictures here, my guess is that they have probably been incapacitated themselves and they'll have to move elsewhere in the short term. Dan?
Jim Stewart in our Washington Bureau. The top half of one World Trade Center building has collapsed and portions of the building have fallen onto the street below. Now, Mika Brzezinski is in that part of Manhattan where the World Trade Centers are located. We pick up her eyewitness reports now. Mika?
Dan, with the collapse now that we witnessed here firsthand, you get a sense there of not only the chaos that is here on the streets of what happened with the two planes that hit the World Trade Towers, but also the depth of the disaster and the loss here of life. I'm sitting here huddled in a small room in PS 89, right near the scene where this school actually has been evacuated right now, and we're huddled by the phone trying to get information to you. And Byron Pitts and I were standing right in plain view of the collapse, and Byron counted 7 people jumping from the building. So you get a sense now of not just the disaster, the visual disaster that you're dealing with and the possibility of casualties, but you get a sense of a massive, at this point, loss of life. There was also mass chaos on the street when this happened. There were crowds of people being held back by police about 2 blocks from the scene, and what we had was just a rampage of people trying to get away, because after that collapse, you can see from the video the plumes, the billowing, the rolling smoke and gases and debris literally flying in the air after the reverberations of the collapse. People just started to run. There were those who were there just to look at it, just to watch what was happening. Some even, into it for the excitement value. And their emotions turned from excitement to complete fear and horror that they too might be hurt in this. And of course, there's the fears for the people who were inside the building, the people who Byron saw jump, but also who was underneath there, who might have been closer to the scene. Because I'm telling you, you hear me? Can you all hear me? We're being evacuated here from the building, and just tell you real quickly, when that collapse happened, if it had been on our side of the building, we would have been covered with that debris. That collapse spread far and wide, and the crowds that were nearby to look at this, I don't think were far enough from the scene. Now, I'm inside a school, which is 3-4 blocks from where this whole disaster happened, and they were methodically trying to get the kids out of here and get them out of here fast. They saw the rolling smoke and the debris coming toward the school, and it was not just a matter of being, a couple of yards away from it. It was get the kids out of here to a different place and quickly. Get your classes together and get them out of here and meet somewhere else. And they had the intercom system going wild here. Cops were running through the halls, and Byron and I were able to get into a small office here where we could get to a phone. But right now we are in an area that is completely evacuated, and we're talking to the NYPD right now about what to do and where to be at this point. I don't know if they're going to let us stay on this phone, but I will tell you, and I'm sure, Dan, as you've been reporting, 50,000 people work at the World Trade Center complex, and at this point there is a severe fear of loss of life at this point and massive casualties. You've got traffic at a complete standstill, and obviously flights in the area have been suspended. We've got a cop here on the scene. Were you actually here? Were you here when this happened, officer?
Yes, I
Can you?
That it was set on fire.
Tell me exactly where you were and what you saw. Can you do that? Okay, the cop right now is working on other things. Sorry about that. We're just trying to get a sense of what happened. I'm sure you've heard a lot of different accounts from different views of this. You've got 2 towers on fire, and now the one that has literally lost a part of the top of the building. And Byron and I were trying to figure out, was it the top quarter of the building, the top 8? It was a massive section of the building. So massive that people who were inside the building, still alive, were jumping. And at this point, what we are dealing with, I'm just looking out a closed door here at the chaos out in the hall here. People are still trying to figure out where to go. They're asking the cops how to get out of here, where's the safest place to go. And what we're trying to do right now is keep a handle on the chaos here, keep a handle on where people are, and we're going to stay on the story. Right now, Dan, I'll throw it back to you.
Mika Brzezinski covering at the scene of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. If you're asking how many people injured, how many people killed, the answer is we do not know. One portion of one of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center here in New York has collapsed. Now, American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, flying from Boston to Los Angeles, is reported by the Associated Press to have reported a terrorist takeover in flight. We have not confirmed that on our own. This is according to the Associated Press. Assumptions can be made all over the place, but the fact is we don't know what airplanes hit the World Trade Centers. We do know that there were 2 separate airplanes not far apart. It's believed that an aircraft of some kind also caused the explosion fire at the Pentagon. Now, there are reports out of Washington at this hour. Keep in mind that the FAA has ordered what in effect is a lockdown on air flights over the United States. Planes in the air have been ordered to land. They don't want any aircraft flying anywhere in the United States if they can keep from it at this moment. And here's the reason. Reports of all kinds are flying around, but there is one report that another aircraft has been hijacked in the eastern corridor. U.S. Air Force fighter aircraft are flying over the White House at this hour. Evacuations of some portions, at least some portions of the White House and the Capitol have been reported over the last hour and a half. But this is a fluid situation, this breaking story situation, and to bring you up to date, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center have been hit each by one aircraft, one slightly before 9 o'clock, one just after 9 o'clock Eastern time this morning. And a short time after that, this picture you see on the right of your screen emerged from the Pentagon. What happened at the Pentagon, unclear, but there are eyewitness reports that an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon. Obviously, authorities are taking every precaution that they can, and amid this report, the unconfirmed report that another civilian airliner possibly has been hijacked somewhere in the Washington area is leading to yet another series of investigations. The Associated Press now, in a flash, quoting the Associated Press, one World Trade Center tower has collapsed. Period. And let's pause for a moment because given the photographs, the live pictures we have, it's very difficult to confirm that report that a whole tower has collapsed. We're going to stick with the moment, for the moment, with the report that a portion of one of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed. Perhaps that's what the Associated Press means. With me here is Russ Mitchell in New York. Russ, seeing these pictures of the World Trade Center, both towers aflame, all that smoke down in that part of Manhattan, is reminiscent of what happened in the World Trade Center not quite 10 years ago.
That's right. It was February 26, 1993. 6 people were killed in a terrorist bombing, over 1,000 people injured. And for folks who are really not familiar with the World Trade Center, let's kind of put things in perspective for you. These are twin towers. They were dedicated back in 1973. They are each more than 1,300 feet tall, 110 stories. As Mika Brzezinski reported a few minutes ago, 50,000 people work in these twin towers, and we're talking about things from brokerage firms to law firms and other offices on those floors. To give you an idea of the amount of folks and the size we're talking about here, each tower of the World Trade Center has its own zip code. Each tower has its own zip code. It is a symbol of American capitalism. And when this happened, I know back in 1993, Dan, the thought was that the World Trade Center, along with other major buildings in the United States, in New York, were targets for this because they were symbols of America. And anyone who was out to prove something would hit these targets. And just like the World Trade Center, by the way, were the tallest buildings in the world before they were displaced by the Sears Tower in Chicago, which has also been evacuated this morning.
In that last attack on the World Trade Center, the terrorist attack for which the attackers were tracked down and convicted and imprisoned, at least some of them, the plan at that time by the terrorist planners was a series of attacks. They intended to attack not only the World Trade Center, but also the United Nations and at least one of the tunnels leading into New York City. Now, what's happened this morning on the prima facie case so far is that this was a coordinated series of attacks which succeeded with the World Trade Centers and with the Pentagon. Now, from the scene, you heard Mika Brzezinski earlier report that she saw people literally running out of their shoes, or I think it was Harold Dow, who reported that. Let me pause and say that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department in Washington. So in Washington, something has hit the Pentagon. Witnesses say they believe an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon, a portion of the Pentagon, and there have been injuries there. Now a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department in Washington. No further details available on that. Most international air flights scheduled to come to the United States being diverted to Canada. The FAA has asked that no aircraft be in the air anywhere in the United States if possible, what amounts to an air travel lockdown in the United States, as the country is obviously under a concerted attack of some kind. Certainly not the whole country, but selected targets, the World Trade Center, Twin Towers, the Pentagon, now a car bomb outside the State Department. It's what's being called a well-orchestrated orgy of terrorism. It's filled the skies here in Manhattan. with black smoke and flames, and a portion, at least a portion, of one of the World Trade Center buildings has collapsed. I repeat for emphasis that the Associated Press, very reliable, perhaps the world's most reliable wire service, says that, quote, a tower has collapsed. However, we don't confirm that, and what our eyes tell us is that a portion of one of the towers has collapsed, but perhaps not the tower itself. But at any rate, black smoke, flames, a lot of rumors, certainly some death and destruction, but how much is unclear. There have been injuries at the Pentagon, certainly injuries at the World Trade Center. It's difficult to believe that there are not some deaths connected with the World Trade Center, that some people were seen jumping from windows in the World Trade Center. We go now to Washington. CBS News correspondent Cheryl Atkinson. Cheryl?
What I saw regarding the Pentagon this morning around 9:45, headed on the George Washington Parkway, which, as you know, borders the Potomac River on the Virginia side, listening to CBS radio as to what was happening in New York. And I immediately thought about the Washington Monument and the White House, of course, which are always considered possible terrorist targets. And before me, in the direction of the Pentagon, came up a huge, huge white and black plume of smoke that within just a couple of minutes filled the entire sky in that direction. I tried to use the cell phone to call the office to report what I was seeing, but cell phone usage was apparently maxed out and it was impossible to get through. People were pulling off to the side of the road. Some of them appeared to be nervous to be crossing the bridges over into Washington, D.C., which is what a lot of that traffic along the Parkway is doing that time of morning. I didn't see a plane. It must have obviously, if there was one, been flying very, very low before it hit the Pentagon. Didn't hear the noise, even though really I was probably within about a mile of the building. And again, it was just an enormous amount of smoke over at the Pentagon in that direction, filling the sky within a matter of minutes.
Cheryl Atkinson in Washington. We now go to David Martin by telephone. David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent, is on the grounds of the Pentagon, is my understanding. David?
Dan, I've been standing about 50 yards away from the west side of the Pentagon, which is where this explosion occurred. Portions of that part of the building have now collapsed. There are perhaps a dozen fire trucks on the scene trying to fight the fire, and they are rigging the grounds around the Pentagon for handling mass casualties. I have only so far seen about perhaps 10 or 12 people who were injured, some of them seriously enough to require...
We're going to interrupt you, David Martin, and come back here to New York because the second tower in the World Trade Center is teetering and looks like it may be in the process of collapsing. The second World Trade Center tower just had another explosion, sort of, we can't call it a secondary explosion, and appears to be in the process of collapsing. We pause to let you absorb this picture. The Statue of Liberty looking past Our Lady of Liberty to the World Trade Center itself. Watch this videotape of the World Trade Center tower. The World Trade Center tower in New York collapsing. A catastrophe on the tip of Manhattan. There are no words that can describe this. It's a time to watch, absorb, and think. As we re-rack that videotape to show you the scene again and give you the horrifying pictures from the tip of Manhattan. This is videotape from just a few moments ago. And what we had hoped and prayed would not happen, could not happen, has happened. New York's World Trade Center, in effect, has been destroyed. The loss of life will be high. There's an eyewitness who saw this happen. Sir, if you were there, please come in and identify yourself to us, please.
Christine.
Sir, it's Dan Rather. If you can identify yourself and tell us what you saw, please.
My name is Ron Oxenstein. The building I work in faces the World Trade. At about 8:30, I heard an explosion, ran to the building, saw fire and smoke and everything coming out. And then all of a sudden, saw two bodies flying out of the windows. A couple of minutes later, about 20 minutes later, I was watching out, and the second explosion was like a fireball came out. And at that point, we just evacuated the building, ran down. And as we were running, just now you see it's like the second tower collapsed. It's just incredible. Couldn't believe this.
Mika Brzezinski is also downtown, where both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. We're now confirming. We mentioned to you earlier, the Associated Press had said that one of the World Trade Center's towers had collapsed, and now the other has collapsed.
Dan, can you hear me? It's Mika.
Yes, Mika.
Dan, I'm sitting here inside PS 89, huddled with about 50 or maybe 100 firefighters, literally covered with soot and debris. I'm also with CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts, who you'll hear from in a moment. We are dealing right now with the aftermath of this second collapse. We were right here, Byron and I, in the thick of things when it happened. It went down. You could hear it, and then you could see people running. I actually was outside the building, this school that's been evacuated. They're actually evacuating the next school as well, Stuyvesant, trying to get people out of the line of fire at this point. I was outside the building where people were wheeling injured victims of this disaster on carts, on paper carts, on box carts, trying to get people away from the scene. And then all of a sudden, Byron and I were looking at each other, and we heard this low rumble. And then you just saw masses of people running, and all the firefighters came inside this building, and they are literally covered, many of them coughing, covered with soot, trying to figure out where to go. One of them said this is like a state of war. We're talking with two of these guys right here. And in fact, let me pass the phone over to CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts. He's got more. Byron.
Byron Pitts from CBS News. Officer, your uniform is covered in soot. Can you tell me something just for a second?
Don't have time. Don't have time.
Now, the tower's collapsed.
All guys, yes, the tower's down, but there's people trapped. We got to go back.
What's the assignment right now for you? What are you trying to do at this moment?
We're trying to get back in there and make sure all the cops, the firemen, and the civilians are out of there.
You said you'd been here before.
Well, we were here when the first part, the other side of the building came down.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. Just dirty, that's all. I'm fine.
Yes, sir. Is there any concern about people in the street at this point?
We're moving everybody back. We want, if the TV stations are on, tell them to tell everybody to stay away from this location. At least probably 10 blocks north of this building in a whole radius.
Is there any expectation you'll evacuate?
What the condition of the other tower is, so.
Yes, sir. So any concern for people on the street at this moment?
There are numerous people trapped from what we understand. We have no idea how many. It could be hundreds, could be thousands.
Trapped in the building or trapped on the street?
In the debris, both.
Officer Johnson, thank you so much. I'll let you get back to work. Dan, right now we're at PS 89. We're standing in the hallway. The building is filled up with, beginning to fill up with smoke and soot. There are about, a dozen firefighters in the building at this point. We believe regrouping to go out again. Excuse me, sir. Byron Pitts from CBS News. You're a firefighter. What can you tell me, sir? We're on the air right now.
Nothing. You got to see a guy in the white hat.
Okay, yes, sir. We have a firefighter. Yes, sir. Can you tell us anything at this point?
No comment.
Okay. All right. Dan, that's the situation here at PS 89. The firefighters, I guess, are using this location as a temporary place to catch their breath. The air is a little fresher here than it is outside. I'll give it back to my colleague, Mika, for a moment.
And Dan, it's Mika Brzezinski here. I don't know if you can still hear me. The air is getting really difficult to breathe. Okay, Dan, I'm gonna send it back to you. I'm just taking a look outside though, and the cars are all covered with debris. We are definitely still in the line of fire.
Mika Brzezinski and Byron Pitts on the lower end of Manhattan. This live photograph, the twin towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. Planes smashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon this morning in what is widely reported to be a well-orchestrated orgy of terrorism. It's filled the skies of lower Manhattan and much of the whole island of Manhattan and Washington, D.C. with black smoke. The streets of both cities have had some chaos. The number of injured and dead is unknown. At the moment, the core, the heart of the story is the collapse of the World Trade Centers. How many people have been injured and killed? Unknown. But we have to face the fact, because it is a fact, that an attack on the World Trade Centers has been devastatingly effective, collapsing both of the Twin Towers. This will go down as a kind of Pearl Harbor of terrorism in Manhattan, New York today. To say nothing of Washington, where the Pentagon has had explosion and flames. Witnesses said that aircraft of some kind went into the Pentagon. That has not been confirmed. A car bomb exploded outside the outside the State Department in Washington. Government shutdown in Washington, D.C. All employees have been advised to go home. I want to double check whether that's Washington, D.C. and or New York. Washington and New York. All non-essential New York City employees have been asked to return home. Secretary of State Colin Powell is returning to the United States from a trip from Peru. President Bush was in Florida this morning visiting some school children. He's on his way back to Washington, D.C. All New York City airports are closed. All entry into the city by tunnel and bridge have been closed. We're not absolutely certain of the George Washington Bridge, but I believe all bridges and tunnels, at least for a while this morning, into the city of New York were closed. And this is the reason. This picture you're looking at here, those of you familiar with New York, this is the great harbor of New York City with the Statue of Liberty just down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, roughly. There you can see the Statue of Liberty off to the left. This is smoke on the water of the Hudson River, New York City Harbor, and we will show you on videotape again the collapse of the second of the World Trade Center buildings. One had collapsed earlier, and then there was this collapse. "110 stories down to the ground. There's been a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center. Just reported. Claire McIntyre is an eyewitness to this collapse of the World Trade Center. Ms. McIntyre?
Yes, hi.
What did you see?
Well,
what did you feel? What did you hear?
I'm on the 91st floor of Building 1, and I faced the north side, and I was at my computer, and I heard the plane, and then I saw it hit right above us, the 92nd or 93rd floor probably, or even 94. And our whole floor just fell to pieces practically, and we got out though. Everybody in my company got out, and we walked down the stairs, and when we got down to the bottom, it was like a war area. It was just, there were bodies on the ground in pieces, I'm sorry to say, and when we came out, we were walking up the block to get away from the building. And that's when 2 World Trade Center blew up, and we were just in a cloud of darkness, and we had to feel our way to some clearness, and we've been pretty much walking ever since, trying to get north.
Ms. McIntyre, if you can stay with us for just one moment, I want to interrupt and say, Dateline Pittsburgh, large plane crashes are reported in western Pennsylvania. The source of this are officials at Somerset County Airport. No further details are available. We've had these large plane crashes reported now in western Pennsylvania, car bomb going on outside the State Department in Washington. No further details on that. Fire and explosion at the Pentagon. Eyewitnesses say an aircraft of some kind possibly went into the Pentagon, and then here in New York, the collapse of these 2 World Trade Center buildings. Ms. McIntyre, eyewitness to what's been happening down there. You said you saw one of the planes as it came into the building.
I did. I actually saw it after it was already partially into the building. I saw the wings and the tail.
Was it a large aircraft?
It looked fairly large. I didn't think it looked as large as I'm hearing it probably was. I thought it was a small jet. It sounds like maybe it was larger than I thought.
Well, but you are the eyewitness. I recognize what a horrific scene that the part of the aircraft was already inside the building when you first saw it.
That's correct.
And did it look to you to be a large airliner?
It looked like a small airliner to me.
Would you say 2 engines or 4, or would you be able to say?
I wouldn't, because that part of the plane was already in the building when I saw it.
Ms. McIntyre, you said that, unfortunately, that you saw people who were killed.
Yes.
Where were those people, and about how many?
I saw definitely two bodies in the plaza down below when we got out of the stairwell. And they were walking us through the plaza, I think trying to make us go very quickly so we didn't see anything. But I definitely saw two bodies that were just torn to shreds.
Did you hear the airplane as it approached?
Yeah, I certainly did.
Describe that sound for me.
Oh, it was horrible. It was the sound of a jet plane coming right at you.
But you didn't see it until it had, in fact, already hit the building.
That's correct.
What did you think during those moments?
I thought, I didn't know what to think, to tell you the truth. I guess I started to panic a little, but then calmed down, and everybody in my company, we have only about 22 people there, but we all kind of ran out, and one man was under a whole pile of debris, and but he was okay. He got out, and then we just started walking down the stairs. It was initially it was panic, but then we calmed down.
Did you actually see either of the World Center towers collapse?
We saw the second one. It seemed like we didn't really see it. We heard it and then looked back and did see everything just flying at us. It was just horrible.
Thank you so much for your eyewitness testimony, and God bless.
Thank you.
CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts is in the area where the World Trade Center Twin Towers have collapsed. You're looking at videotape of one of them collapsing. We go live to Byron Pitts. Byron.
Dan, I'm at PS 89, an elementary school in the area. We're 3 blocks from the tower. Joining me now is firefighter Tom McGee. Sir, what can you tell me?
We were in the Marriott Hotel when the first explosion or the first collapse happened. Took out the lobby of the hotel. We were able to crawl out after about a half hour, crawling up the block. The second building came down, I guess. I don't know. But it went from day to night. It was the most god-awful thing I've ever seen.
You said earlier...
People falling out the building left and right. They were jumping in the early stages of the fire.
Yes, sir. Firefighter McGee, I heard you say earlier that you lost everybody. What were you talking about?
I can't find anything I meant. It won't come up on the radio or the cell phone. So I don't know.
Where did you last see them, sir?
They were in front of One World Trade Center, in front of the Marriott, and about a block up from that. And it's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
How were you?
I'm going to talk to my wife.
Yes, sir. Oh, you were saying again. Please go ahead. A message for your wife.
Marie, I just want to the last word you heard on the phone was, "Oh my God, that was the second collapse." I just want to let you know I made it out.
A message from a firefighter to his wife. Dan, back to you.
Byron Pitts on the tip of Manhattan, where a firefighter just said, "It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life." And for many Americans looking at this scene, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed by apparent terrorist act. They can say, this is the worst thing we've seen in our lives. In Washington, a city on edge as well, where the Pentagon has been struck in some way, explosion and fire, we go to David Martin on cell phone. David?
I'm at Arlington National Cemetery, which is just across the highway from the Pentagon. A portion of the west side of the Pentagon has collapsed. I spoke to one of many injured who were in the building at the time. He had a light head wound. I asked him what happened. He said he didn't know, but as he was leaving the building, he asked a security guard, "What hit us?" And the security guard said, "A plane." And you can see pieces of twisted fuselage lying about 50 yards away from the building of the Pentagon. Right now, the scene is one of black smoke and dozens of fire engines, medevac helicopters. They are rigging that part of the lawn of the Pentagon, which is where the helipad that the Secretary of Defense uses is located. They are rigging that to handle mass casualties. They're bringing in large numbers of stretchers to deal with this. All appearances are that for the first time in its 50-plus year history, the Pentagon has been attacked.
Attacked. People have been injured. If there are any fatalities, it is not yet known. We have no further details on a car bomb, which was reported to have exploded outside the State Department in New York at the World Trade Center. It is a disaster of historic proportions. There's no getting around that. That both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. And now there's a report of some mysterious plane crashes in Pennsylvania. And to bring you up to date on that, Russ Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yes, there is a report of a large plane crash in western Pennsylvania at Somerset County Airport. According to the Associated Press, it crashed about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The plane is believed to be a Boeing 767. It crashed about 10 o'clock Eastern time. That would have been about 45 minutes ago. And the crash, of course, came in the same morning of these crashes into the World Trade Center here in New York. If we can go back in the control room, look at the video from early this morning at 8:45 and to see how this all began. 8:45 this morning. Let's see if we can look at that. The planes hitting the towers. This is the second plane. Second plane happened about 9 o'clock this morning. As you can see, it looks like it's coming right into the tower. That'd be Tower 2. In a moment, you'll see an explosion. That was shortly after 9 o'clock. The first crash, you're seeing Tower 1, closest to you, happened about 8:45. There are reports from people in Brooklyn, another borough of the city of New York, about 3 miles from the World Trade Center, saw office paper from these towers come down in their neighborhoods. The impact of these explosions was that great.
Russ Mitchell with me at the anchor desk here at CBS News World Headquarters. The picture of the airplane actually flying into the World Trade Center tower. An incredible, indelible scene. And then the videotape, which we've played from time to time, of one of the towers itself collapsing. Bridget Foley is outside St. Vincent Hospital here in New York, where some of the injured have been brought. Bridget?
Hi, Dan. I'm at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan, below 14th Street. It's a level 1 trauma center. Hundreds of the wounded and critically wounded are expected to arrive here in the coming hours. On the sidewalk, the scene is scores, dozens of medics in scrubs waiting for people to come in. Ambulances are pulling up every few minutes, dropping off the injured, dropping off the critically wounded, and heading back downtown. On the sidewalk as well, priests, religious people, ready to give comfort if that's needed. The doctors here are asking for anyone in the New York area, that includes the suburbs, to please go to an area hospital and give blood. It's going to become critical as the wounded come into local hospitals. Also, one of the other big worries here is smoke inhalation. We've already seen dozens of people come in on ambulances, covered in debris, barely able to get onto the gurney or into a chair. It's a very disturbing scene.
Bridget Foley at St. Vincent Hospital here in New York, where some of the wounded are being brought. An eyewitness, Associated Press reporter Dunstan Priel, described what he called a strange sucking sound from the Trade Center buildings after the first building collapsed. Keep in mind that both of the World Trade Center buildings have now collapsed. He described what he said was a strange sucking sound, quote, windows shattered, people were screaming and diving for cover, people walked around like ghosts, covered in dirt, weeping and wandering, dazed, unquote. And those people who were walking around like ghosts, covered in dirt, weeping and wandering, dazed, were, keep in mind, among the lucky ones. How many have been killed and injured in these coordinated terrorist attacks today, what President Bush has described as apparent terrorist attacks? The total number of killed and wounded, we simply do not know. Now we have an eyewitness who saw the World Trade Center building collapse. Tom, tell me, first of all, catch your breath and tell me what you saw, what you heard.
I heard the plane go over. I was having coffee outside and downtown, and then heard the crash, and the first reports were that it was a plane. So I headed down there just to, try to hitch up with a crew or something, and found a cameraman from Merrill Lynch who had his camera out, so he was shooting pictures, and between us we were able to stay outside of the police lines and record some of the awful people jumping from that building. It was awful. The building that was most engulfed was the front building, and it was really on fire, Dan. The back building was, by this time it was smoky, but it wasn't burning as much. And there were reports on the ground, unconfirmed reports, that there was another plane in the area. There's a lot of frightened misinformation, as you might imagine. The police, the ambulance, the emergency services people were all doing their best to control the crowds. An awful lot of people worked down there, and it was work hours. At that time, maybe 45 minutes into the taping that we were doing, which was maybe a half hour after, there was, it was an explosion. It was way up where the fire was, and the whole building at that point bellied out in flames, and everybody ran. I mean, those who could. There's an awful lot of places that you couldn't hide down there. The crowd we were with, and I lost my cameraman, I don't know if he's alive or dead, we ran into a parking garage, and the smoke, the dust, you can see it, chased us all into there, and I had the worst feeling that I was going to die in a parking garage. But there was a lot of people under control shouting, "Down here, I have fresh air." So we ran down. No, you couldn't see a thing. Could not see a thing. It was like night. The lights stayed on the lamp posts. And finally, we were able to get out, and there were people walking in total, complete daze. Somebody knew where the river was, and we all headed toward the river, which from that point was to the west. But you couldn't see a thing. It was just completely and utterly night there, with a few glimmering streetlights still there. People were crying, of course. There were people frightened. There were people looking for their babies. One mother was running back. The police wouldn't let her go. It was a terrible scene, a terrible scene.
Unfortunately, have a cup of coffee. Get some of the dust from the World Trade Center off of you. And thank you for that series of eyewitness reports. From Washington, Federal Protective Services now says there was no car bomb at the State Department. We've been reporting, which was reported earlier, that there had been an apparent car bomb at the State Department. I will repeat for emphasis, the Federal Protective Services says there was no, I repeat, no car bomb at the State Department. We've been saying straight through this morning that there are going to be those occasions when there are reports, rumors, speculation. We do the best we can to separate fact from reports, but it's inevitable that Some first reports will be wrong, but these are the facts as we know them. What President Bush has called apparent terrorist attacks, 2 airplanes at separate times, not far apart, hit the World Trade Centers. The World Trade Center buildings have collapsed. About 50,000 people work, generally speaking, in those 110-story buildings at the tip of Manhattan. A short while later, an aircraft of some sort plowed into the Pentagon in Washington. There was an explosion and fire there. There have been some injured. If anybody is dead at the Pentagon, that is not yet known. American Airlines Flight 11, bound for Los Angeles from Boston, has been identified as one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center this morning. This is according to American Airlines officials, quoted by the Associated Press. We had passed along earlier that this Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was reported to have been one of the planes that might have crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines now has confirmed that it was. The airline said the flight was hijacked after takeoff. The number of passengers on the plane could not be immediately determined. Los Angeles International Airport is under tight security. Police are not allowing people to unload baggage to board flights at the American Airlines terminal. As one officer at the Los Angeles terminal put it, all we know is what we've heard from radio and television. We're not allowing any unattended vehicles near the terminals. The New York stock market is closed for the day. The New York City primary election has been called off. All New York City airports are closed. The FBI Joint Terrorist Task Force is on the scene here in New York. An absolutely horrific scene here in New York where the World Trade Centers, both of them, have collapsed. And we go to Jim Stewart in Washington, where the Pentagon has also been hit by an attack. Jim?
Dan, we've just received word from the FBI that a United Airlines flight has apparently crashed at Camp David, the home of, or the retreat of the president. We have no word on casualties. The FBI tells us only that they have a report from the FAA that they are trying to confirm that a United Airlines flight has crashed in the vicinity of or at Camp David. Dan, the situation in Washington right now, frankly, as you can imagine, is a bit confused, but I can tell you that they are giving a great deal of thought right now to what they're calling continuity of government. They are frankly trying to decide where to take the president once he lands at Andrews Air Force Base, and they're trying to decide what to do with Congress, that they need to be possibly evacuated from the city. They have coordinated so far with the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Organization, which handles major disasters, and they are anticipating that FEMA will take overall command of this as if it were a weapons of mass destruction attack on the United States, a scenario that they have played out many times here before. Now, I want to stress that thus far, they don't have a clear plan, but the notion here is that the heads of state, the heads of government, the primary officials of the United States should be removed, apparently, from Washington, D.C. to a safe location. And the first priority, obviously, is the president. Only moments ago, when I was speaking with the FBI, the thought there was that he would possibly go to Camp David. If this report is true from the FAA by way of the FBI, that would now appear not to be a plausible alternative. Where to take Congress, since that the House and Senate now have been evacuated, is also a question for them to decide. Quite frankly, they acknowledge they're having a great deal of problems because of the shutdown on our own commercial aviation system. They're having problems getting people into location to respond to these incidents that we've been watching all morning in New York and now apparently in other parts of the country as well. So they're going to be turning to the military for some alternative aviation resources, and quite frankly, they're encountering a problem, they say, with a collapse of the infrastructure and the telephone company. everybody is trying to call home and see how their loved ones are doing. And quite frankly, that's overloaded the circuits, and it's affected the government's ability to do business as well. I wish I had more detail for you, Dan, but as you know, these events are unfolding as we speak, and that's all we have at this point from Washington. Dan?
Jim, about this report that a United Airlines plane has crashed into Camp David, Maryland, the presidential retreat just outside of Washington. Repeat the source on that for our listeners and viewers, please.
The source of this information is an FBI official in Washington who says that he has been informed by the FAA, has not confirmed it himself, but has been informed by the FAA that a United Airlines flight, he says it's United Airlines Flight 93, has crashed into the vicinity of or at Camp David. Dan, I will tell you one other thing, too, that the FBI and terrorist experts here have immediately noted, and that is today, September the 11th, is the anniversary of the Camp David Accords, signed at that historic location after weeks of negotiations between the Arabs and the Israelis, and of course has been a thorn in the side of both parties now for some years, and a source of great consternation. You can't help but notice, according to the FBI, the coincidence of the date, and now, if this is true, the coincidence of the target. Dan.
Jim Stewart in Washington. At the World Trade Centers, the Twin Towers in New York, both of which have now collapsed. Many lives are believed to have been lost, but many lives are also believed to have been saved. It will be hours, perhaps many hours, before we have anywhere approaching a clear picture on the loss of life and the number of people injured in the collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. At the Pentagon in Washington, we know there have been injuries. There have been no reports of fatalities as yet in what is believed to have been an aircraft of some kind. David Martin, who's on the scene, said he saw the twisted remains of what appeared to be the fuselage, and that would indicate a fixed-wing aircraft, although early reports from one eyewitness indicated that perhaps a helicopter had gone into the Pentagon. The truth is that very few facts are known about the attack on the Pentagon. What was described as a large plane is reported to have crashed near Somerset, Pennsylvania. Then there is this report from an FBI official telling Jim Stewart in Washington that what is, quote, believed to have been a United Airlines plane of some kind crashed into Camp David, the presidential retreat outside of Maryland. One is reminded as we look at these horrific scenes, and there's no other way to describe it. Earlier on, we were cautious as we thought the situation dictated about our reporting about even one of the World Trade Centers collapsing. We quoted the Associated Press saying that one had collapsed, and then we literally saw on the screen the second one collapse, and both of the World Trade Centers have been collapsed in this almost unbelievable attack. The late Edward R. Murrow said, "No one can terrorize a whole nation unless we are all his accomplices," quote unquote. Something to ponder as we size up this situation, which may not be over. The picture that emerges, at least the initial picture, is one of a series of coordinated terrorist attacks. Do we know that for a fact? No, but the evidence at hand strongly indicates that that's what's happened. That an American Airlines plane on a flight from Boston to Los Angeles, according to American Airlines, is one of the planes that was hijacked and was crashed into the World Trade Center. Exclamation point, pause. If someone wrote it in a novel, it might be considered just a little beyond belief. Believe it, it happened this morning, according to American Airlines. The second aircraft that crashed into the other World Trade Center building, we've had various descriptions of it. No one knows where it came from or what it was. Mika Brzezinski is on scene in downtown New York. Come in, Mika.
Dan, we're 3 blocks from the scene, and we saw it all after the first 2 hits. We saw the explosion and also the collapse of the tower. I'm with Deborah Bond and her 12-year-old son, Duran. Deborah is a cook at PS 234, just across the street from here. She, too, is 3 blocks from the scene of this disaster, and I'm sure you've gathered by now that is way too close to the scene when this was all going down, because the soot and debris literally came upon us. If I walk outside the school right now, I am walking in 4 inches of soot and debris. Papers and checks from inside the World Trade Center have made their way. Pieces of offices and pieces of literally people's professional lives are just strewn all over the street. Deborah, you brought your son to work with you today because you thought it was safer to bring him to work with you. What did you both see?
We saw the building on fire. I was working in the kitchen and I heard an explosion, so I ran over to the building, and I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a bomb at first, and then people was yelling, "No, it was a plane. It was a 2-engine plane." Just went into it, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I saw bodies jumping out the window. I saw another explosion where the building just collapsed, and then all the smoke, you couldn't see outside at all. It was just black. You couldn't see nothing outside at all. It was real scary.
You had your son with you. You were clutching his hand, keeping him with you. What were your thoughts as a mother as this was happening? Can you describe the emotions that you were feeling, and did you know what to do?
I didn't know what to do. I was so afraid. I was in the building when they told us that everybody had to go out. The building tried to, and I was grabbing onto him and holding on to him for dear life because, I mean, it's like, you see your life before you. You don't know what was going to become of it. I thought that he was going to get killed from the degree and stuff alone.
I caught up with you as I walked out of the school. It was very difficult to breathe at that point. It was shortly after the tower actually went down. You had your mouth covered. Your son had his shirt over his face. You were coughing and trying to get away. Tell us a little bit about the chaos and exactly where did you think you would go at this point? Because I know we pulled you in here. We're actually, I should let you know, Dan, we're huddled in a small room inside PS 89, and literally you could watch when the collapse went down, the debris just roll over the school. The school went black. It was as if it was night outside. And I pulled these 2 in here. Deborah, tell us a little bit about your feelings when you hear that this is a possible terrorist attack.
I didn't know what to think. I was so afraid.
On-scene report to, this is a bulletin from CBS News. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says, and I quote, "There have been a tremendous
but there was this
lost in But we're going to right now go to Jim Stewart in Washington as we look at these horrific pictures from the World Trade Center. We go to Washington. Jim Stewart.
Dan, some details are starting to come into focus now. First, an update on the attack on the Camp David vicinity. Secret Service personnel tell CBS producer Bill Owens that there was no damage on Camp David itself. Apparently, the crash occurred near there. The presumption is that Camp David was the target. Now, we are given some information now by federal law enforcement authorities about the sequence of the hijackings today that have led to these incidents. We are told, and Dan, I have to stress this is sketchy information, but we are told that there were 4 hijackings. The detail that we've been given thus far on those hijackings is American Flight 11, which is described as a 757 from Boston to the West Coast, United Flight 175 out of Dulles International Airport outside of Washington, D.C., American Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles, and United Flight 93, which apparently was from Newark en route to San Francisco. Now, the only firm information that the FBI has shared so far is that the United Flight 93, is apparently the aircraft that went down in the vicinity of Camp David. It is believed, they say, that it is American Flight 11, and I believe this has been reported already by CBS. American Flight 11 the 757 aircraft from Boston, was one of the 2 aircraft involved in the World Trade Center. It is not clear where the other 2 aircraft crashed, but it is confirmed, the FBI says, citing the FAA, I should add, that these are the 4 aircraft that have been involved in the hijackings were involved in the crashes today. One other significant piece of information, Dan, is apparently there is and has been some communication from the aircraft after they were hijacked. We are led to believe that the FAA has recordings of some message, some communication from the aircraft before they crashed and into these targets. There is still no word, Dan, on what the continuity of government, and I hate to use such an official phrase here, but it's the only one that's been thrown at me so far by federal authorities, but what the continuity of government is going to be, and there's a great deal of talk, a great deal of concern here about that, because, as you can imagine, people are quite at loose ends here in the nation's capital, and they want to ensure that the continuity of government stays in place. Therefore, they're trying to decide where does the president go once he lands coming back from his trip, I believe in Texas. He will land at Andrews Air Force Base. We believe the plan had been that he would go to Camp David. That appears not to be the case any longer, but we don't have any confirmation of that. And then there's the question of what do the cabinet officers do, and what does the House and Senate do? The White House has been evacuated and is still considered by law enforcement a potential terrorist target. The president cannot go there. The same is true for Capitol Hill. The House and Senate cannot go there. The Justice Department has been evacuated except for some key personnel. The only major federal building that I can find, Dan, in the city of Washington right now that is up and running and apparently handling this situation is the Federal Bureau of Investigations, what they call their SIOC room, their Strategic Information and Command Center. Normally, there would be a war room and a situation room, I should say, at the Pentagon. But the Pentagon has never been attacked before in the history of this country and is not in a position, apparently, to coordinate events there now. So much of what's happening in terms of a response to these events is being coordinated out of the FBI. That's all we have at the moment from here, Dan.
And quite a bit, Jim Stewart, and thank you for that. Jim, if you can have somebody put up, I hate to give you instructions on the air, put up a graphic of the flights that have been identified as flights that were hijacked this morning. There'll be an awful lot of people interested in that, and we'll try to put it up on screen. 4 airplanes are now believed to have been hijacked. 2 of them, well, let's say 2 aircraft crashed into the World Trade Centers and collapsed both of the World Trade Centers, with what New York City Mayor Giuliani now says has been a, quote, tremendous loss of life. Canada has now shut down all of its airports. And let's pause as you look at these devastating pictures. There's no other word that comes to mind of this scene at the tip of Manhattan, in sight of the Statue of Liberty. A successful attack on the World Trade Centers, collapsing both buildings. Now quickly, here's what's been happening. Just before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, a plane crashes into a tower of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Then shortly after 9 a.m., a second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. President Bush, on a trip to Sarasota, Florida, called the crisis, quote, an apparent terrorist attack and, quote, a national tragedy, unquote. Then an aircraft of some kind crashes near the Pentagon. We've been saying that it hit the Pentagon. The Associated Press says near the Pentagon, but somewhere at the Pentagon an aircraft crashed just outside of Washington, across the Potomac River from the capital, of course, in Northern Virginia. That was about an hour after the attacks in New York. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol and the White House, were evacuated. Officials cited a credible threat of a terrorist attack as the reason for the evacuations. Then the Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. Shortly after 10 o'clock Eastern Time, one World Trade Center tower in New York collapsed. This was about an hour after being hit by the plane. In the early going, it looked like only part of the building had collapsed, but it turned out that one trade center collapsed shortly after 10 a.m. American Airlines reported that one of its planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11 hijacked after takeoff from Boston en route to Los Angeles. Then senior law enforcement officials said car bomb, and a car bomb had exploded outside the State Department in Washington, D.C. That was senior law enforcement officials. But then later, Federal Protective Services denied any car bomb attack had occurred outside the State Department. So that remains unclear at the moment, although the latest information is there was no car bomb. Financial markets suspended trading in the wake of the attacks. Officials at Somerset County Airport in Pennsylvania say, quote, a large plane crashed in western Pennsylvania about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. That was at about 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And then at 10:28 a.m. Eastern Time, the second tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. Then there was a fourth explosion. A fourth counted big explosion rocked the collapsed remains of the World Trade Center. That was at about 10:38 a.m. Eastern Time. Authorities across the country have gone on alert, tightening security at strategic facilities and evacuating high-profile buildings. That included some in Chicago, tall office buildings, including the stock commodities exchanges were evacuated in Chicago. And Securities and Exchange Commission says all financial markets are closed for the day. Now, Dateline London, Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack, that was his quote, on U.S. interests for its support of Israel. And an Arab journalist with access to bin Laden said today that bin Laden was, quote, almost certainly, unquote, behind the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. But of course, that is his opinion. We go to CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer in Washington with details on what's happening to make sure that the government is steady from the top and remains in command and in a steady, paced command, calculated command throughout the day. Bob?
Well, Dan, you spent many years in Washington, so you'll recognize where I am. I'm about a block north of the White House, and in contrast to all of those scenes of devastation that you're seeing in New York, look, from my vantage point across Washington, I can see the White House, the Washington Monument on past to the Jefferson Memorial, all the way out way back there to National Airport. This is almost like a city that is deserted because the White House has been evacuated, the Capitol has been evacuated, the Executive Office building next to the White House has been evacuated. Now, beyond the Executive Office building, which is that rather unusual building which is just to the right of the White House, you can still see, Dan, in the background smoke. Now, that is the smoke that is coming from the explosion that took place earlier today at the Pentagon. Washington is, I've never seen the city in quite the mood it is right now, Dan, because in contrast to these scenes where, which have obviously been blocked off, the only people you'll see moving from here to National Airport, and there no aircraft are taking off. The only people that are moving at this point are the security people who are atop the White House. But, of course, the White House itself has been evacuated. But as you come into this area, the streets of Washington are filled with people. Many offices, many private businesses have closed for the day. People are out in the streets, and they are, I would describe the mood this way. If these terrorists, Dan, wanted to get the attention of the United States, they have gotten it. And I must say, I think back to that line that one of the Japanese admirals said after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He said, I fear we may have awakened a sleeping giant. From what I can tell and from what I talk to people on the streets, the American people will not allow this to stand. This is a mood we're seeing on the streets of Washington that I have not seen in a long, long time. Now, to bring you up to date on some of the details, all of the government buildings have been evacuated. Members of the Armed Services Committee up at the Capitol have been called to a briefing. We know not where or how many people are being briefed. The Union Station, which is the railroad station here in Washington, it has been evacuated. Every government agency at this point is taking extra precautions, and most government officials have been sent home for the day. It's really something, Dan.
Bob Schieffer in Washington. Jacques Chirac, Premier of France, once said, terrorism has become the systematic weapon of a war that knows no borders or seldom has a face, unquote. Something to ponder this day as we look at pictures now, live pictures from the scene where the twin towers of the World Trade Centers have collapsed. I want to show you on videotape the sequence of the key events of this morning. First, watch this airplane as it comes in. This is not a mock-up. This is a photograph taken at the time. You can see the fire come out the backside of this tower. Smoke covered the twin towers for a while, and then the first tower collapsed. The hope at the time was it would be only a portion of this first tower. The whole tower collapsed. Keep in mind that on an average day, 50,000 people work in and immediately around these towers. And then later, incredibly, unbelievably, the second tower collapses. Before those towers collapsed. And as they collapsed on the ground in the immediate vicinity of the World Trade Centers, of course there was chaos and confusion and, yes, some panic. Some people in desperation were seen leaping from the towers before they collapsed. More buildings are being evacuated downtown. Byron Pitts is there. Byron, they're now evacuating buildings around the World Trade Center?
Yes, Dan. We're about 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center at PS 89, a public school here. A few minutes ago, firefighters running full tilt evacuated the building next to this school, screaming there's been a bomb or a gas leak. No one knew for sure. Everyone just ran as hard as they could. Dan, mark this down, 9:29. Standing a few blocks from the World Trade Building, that was the moment, it seemed to me, it went from shock to horror. That was the time when people on the street where I was standing, we saw the first person jump from the building. And at that moment, it went from being just an awful, bizarre scene to realizing that the human lives were being taken. Joining me now is Julio Chavez, who works here at the school, PS 89. Sir, tell me what you saw.
Well, basically, I saw just a whole bunch of smoke, fire, and like 5 minutes later, I saw another plane hit the building and a whole bunch of people run. I mean, it was like mass hysteria. It was just craziness, and I was just shocked. I didn't have no words for nothing. And
did you see any of the people who were injured from your vantage point?
No, you could see a couple of people falling from the building. That's about it. I couldn't see nothing else.
Julio Chavez, thank you so much, sir. And so, Dan, that's the situation here on the ground. I walked around outside a few minutes ago, and the soot in some places is almost ankle deep. You can see, and we're 3 blocks from the building. There, you can see pieces of burnt paper on the ground. I picked up a package of papers that looked like payroll checks. They were all checks written from a bank inside the World Trade Tower building, as well as going to employees at a building there. So one can only assume it was blown, those, at that point, 5 blocks from the building to where I'm standing. You've described it, Dan, mass chaos here. We've seen firefighters cry. I talked to a police officer. She had tears in her eyes. I asked her if she was okay. She said no. She told me her sister works in one of those buildings. She, like so many people, have loved ones. They don't know where they are right now. Dan.
Byron Pitts, speaking from this live, from the scene, and this is a live photograph of the tip of Manhattan. What President Bush has called an apparent terrorist attack, a series of attacks on carefully selected targets in America. Not all of Manhattan, much less all of New York City, is in flame and smoke, but a great deal of it is. There's no ducking, no dodging the fact that this attack on the World Trade Center, both buildings, has been devastatingly, horrifyingly effective from the terrorist point of view. Now, 4 airlines are reported to have been hijacked this morning. One of them, an American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, is said by American Airlines to be one of the 2 planes that crashed into one of the World Trade Center buildings earlier this morning. We're trying to confirm. We You know, we'd rather be last than be wrong with something. So we're trying to confirm what flights were hijacked. Now, United Flight 175 Dulles to Los Angeles reportedly, allegedly, and supposedly was one of the hijacked planes. United Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco, is believed to have been one of the flights hijacked. There is also a report that American Airlines Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles may, underscore the word, may have been one of the 4 planes hijacked. We'll try to pull this together for you on a graphic, but I want to restate, I don't think we can say it too often, and those of you who think we are saying it too often, please forgive us, that in a breaking situation of this magnitude, there are bound to be some reports that are wrong, and frequently the early reports are wrong. This much is not wrong. 2 of the World Trade Center Twin Towers, both have collapsed. 50,000 people normally work in them. The mayor of New York says that there's been, quote, tremendous loss of life. Just how tremendous, we do not yet know. Many people killed, many people injured in the crash of the Twin Towers in New York. Incredibly, an airplane hit, 2 airplanes hit, 1 each in each of the Twin Towers, and each of the Twin Towers collapsed. The Pentagon, an aircraft crashed at, some say near, some say in, but at the Pentagon, the first time in the history of the U.S. Defense Department that the Pentagon along the banks of the Potomac has been under attack. The Pentagon was hit by an aircraft. There have been injuries there. If there have been any loss of life, we do not know it. There's confusion about whether a car bomb went off around the State Department. The latest word from Federal Protective Services was that previous reports were wrong, that no car bomb went off. Jim Stewart has confirmed with the FBI that an aircraft of some kind crashed near, if not at Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland. Whereas President Bush, at last report, he was on a flight, of course on his Air Force plane, from Florida to Washington. The president was last reported in the air. Whether he will go to Washington or not has not yet been confirmed. In downtown New York, we have another eyewitness on videotape. The picture you are seeing is live of the collapse of the Twin Towers. This eyewitness is on videotape.
I looked up and I saw the second plane hit. Had to be a commercial-sized airliner.
What went through your mind?
That it couldn't be real. Just that it couldn't be real.
As you looked up there, I mean...
Can of it. Got it. Well, that was the eyewitness in downtown New York as to what he saw. Now, President Bush, before leaving Florida, he was in Florida where his brother is in what is widely supposed to be a very tough race for re-election as governor. The president was down there this morning. He returned to his aircraft to return presumably to Washington, but before he did so, he made this statement.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
President Bush on videotape in Florida. We go back to live picture. You're looking just past the Empire State Building, a majestic building just to the right of your screen, and then beyond the black smoke. And let us pause for just a moment here to let you think about what the President just said and about what's happened in our country and to our country on this day. Russ Mitchell is here with me. Russ, telephone service, particularly in these areas of the Northeast, such as New York and Washington, is sporadic at best.
That's right. The phone company is advising folks in the Northeast to stay off the phone if you possibly can. If you were calling someone in the Northeast and you get a circuits are busy signal, as I got a few moments ago when I tried to call a source in Washington, the word is don't panic. The circuits are busy. It's going to be like this all day. If you're using a cell phone in the Northeast, it is very unlikely, we are told, you're going to be able to get out. And that's going to be the case for the rest of the day.
Russ Mitchell, we go to Washington and Jim Stewart. But Jim, just before I turn the mic over to you, that the leadership of the Congress, the United States Congress, both House and Senate, reports that they are now in, quote, secure positions. Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House, says the House leadership has been taken to a secure location. Tom Daschle, his press secretary, said a few moments ago that Daschle, along with the congressional leadership, all of them are, quote, secure. Jim Stewart.
Well, Dan, as bizarre as it sounds, the government here, the pieces of it that are working and up in the buildings that are still occupied, are dusting off plans that this country made in the event of a nuclear attack. I mean, it is that serious. It is that serious in their minds that they have implemented the plans that would go into effect had there been a nuclear explosion, a terrorist nuclear explosion, or an attack by a foreign nation on this country. That means essentially that that you could see the military become involved in keeping a hold on things here in the nation's capital. We certainly haven't had that. Don't want to suggest that that's going to happen. But these are items that are being discussed. Specifically, where does the president go to continue his chain of command, his position in the chain of command? We've already heard now that some members of Congress have been relocated. In the past, that would have been to a location in West Virginia. I don't think that's the case any longer. There are secure places, though, outside the Capitol that presumably are being used. In terms of what the FBI has picked up on thus far, to repeat, they believe that there were at least 4 hijackings of commercial aircraft. An American Airlines flight out of Boston, a United flight out of Dulles, an American flight out of Dulles, and a United flight out of Newark. The flight out of Newark is the one that is believed to have gone down in the vicinity, not directly owned, but in the vicinity of Camp David. 2 of the others, Dan, are believed to have struck the World Trade Center there in New York. It is still unclear to the FBI precisely what they're dealing with there at the Pentagon. David Martin, of course, is on the scene and has reported of the casualties and the obvious damage to the building. Collaterally, I'm told, that is impacted on the Pentagon's communications ability, and right now the command center, if you will, for the nation's response to this attack is being run out of FBI headquarters at 10th and Pennsylvania. That building has not been evacuated. Justice Department across the street has been. Already, I would tell you that national security experts on Capitol Hill and those who advise the chain of command of this nation are talking of how do we retaliate. But the question is, retaliate against who? It is entirely too early to say who is responsible for this. That hopefully will sort itself out in the time to come. I will tell you, though, it is openly being speculated on in the United States security apparatus that Osama bin Laden is the only person who had the apparatus, the money, and the desire to pull off what he did. They are also pointing, Dan, as we said earlier, at the coincidence here of this date. And dates are extremely important in the terrorist world. Sometimes they escape the notice of the American intelligence. Obviously, this one did. We've been caught flat-footed, in the words of one senior official. But September the 11th, 1978 was the signing of the Camp David Accords, which has long been a matter of dispute and notation in the Islamic world. There is also a recognition among federal law enforcement officials that the attack on the World Trade Center is something that had to be expected, in the sense that it is the only target that Osama bin Laden and his organization have said would be a primary target in the United States as the symbol of this nation. And it was, of course, in 1993 that it was attacked, Dan.
Jim Stewart in Washington. Dateline New York, a police official speaking on condition of anonymity says that the number of trade center casualties still unknown could be, quote, in the thousands. In the thousands. No one at this time should be particularly surprised by that, keeping in mind that incredibly, almost unbelievably, almost inconceivably, the twin towers, both towers of the World Trade Center, collapsed this morning, one shortly after the other. And having said that 50,000 people on your average day work in those towers, it should come as no surprise that a police official says that the number of trade center casualties still unknown could be, you may want to mark that word, could be, quote, in the thousands, unquote. Now, as we said earlier, unquestionably, many lives have been lost in this attack. Many lives have also been saved. It may be the rest of the day, even longer, before we have a clear picture of how many people were killed, how many were injured, were any police or firemen in their desperate efforts to save people, were any of their lives lost? We simply don't know. We may not know for a long while. Now, Dateline Fort Worth, Texas American Airlines confirmed today that it lost 2 aircraft in the tragic incidents of this morning. The flights were Flight 11, a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. That's one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. It had 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots on board. And then American says Flight 77, a Boeing 757, the other was a 767, operating from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots, were lost in incidents this morning. Now, because of the heightened security due to the nature of today's events, American said it is working closely with government authorities and will not release any more information at this time. However, if you are a customer of American Airlines and you wish to receive information about relatives, you should call American's response number at 1-800-245-0999. 1-800-245-0999 for information on these 2 American airline planes that have been involved in tragedy this morning. Russ Mitchell has late word on what's happening in and around Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and in Pennsylvania.
That's right, Dan. Earlier this morning, we told you about a plane crash near Pittsburgh, just north of the Somerset County Airport. Another plane that was hijacked today was United Flight 93, which was traveling from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. United Airlines has just confirmed that flight is the one that crashed outside of Pittsburgh this morning. As of this moment, we don't know how many folks were on board, don't have any idea of casualties or fatalities. We'll get that for you in just a bit. But again, United Airlines has confirmed that yet another plane that was hijacked this morning has crashed, this one just outside of Pittsburgh near the Somerset County Airport.
And some of the monuments and principal buildings in Philadelphia, we were told earlier, had been shut down as a security measure.
That is right. Those shut down about 2 hours ago, and they are expected to be closed the remainder of the day.
We go to John Roberts in Washington. John?
Well, Dan, the Secret Service, as you can imagine, has activated its emergency plan. It's a plan that has been activated in stages prior to today's numerous events. One time that it was activated was when that small plane crashed on the south lawn of the White House. At about 9:40 this morning, the Vice President was evacuated from his office at the White House. Destination unknown. This is being kept very tightly under wraps at this point. The President, who was in Sarasota, Florida this morning for an educational event, also en route to destination unknown. But CBS happens to be traveling in the tight pool with the President today. We have one of our camera crews and one of our producers aboard Air Force One, and I'm certain that just as soon as the administration allows them to disclose whatever location they may be traveling to, we, as the other networks will hear from them in a prompt fashion. What we know at this point, Dan, is that the White House has been evacuated, as has the old executive office building, and a cordon of about 2 blocks has been set up around that building. There was obviously an imminent threat after this other explosion at the Pentagon earlier this morning. As to whether or not the White House itself was specifically targeted, no one will say. And again, the location of the President at present and where he is headed, and the Vice President and where he may be, being kept very tightly under wraps. But we do understand, Dan, from talking with sources close to security that provides protection for the President, that they are not likely to be headed to Weather Mountain. That is that highly secretive facility in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the western part of Virginia, which is essentially a hollowed-out piece of granite, which there are contingency plans to take officers of the administration, the president, the vice president, his staff and the cabinet, and the leadership of Congress to in the event of an all-out attack on the United States. We understand that they will not activate Weather Mountain. That's a direction that it appears that they're not headed in at this point. The president could go to any military base across the country. There are also a number of other facilities in which there are secure communications that the president could operate from, one of those being Camp David. Now, there had been earlier reports of some sort of a crash or an explosion near Camp David. Sources close to protection for the president told me this morning, Dan, just a little while ago, that they have not had any reports of that, though, as you can imagine, because of the extent of the carnage against America this morning. It's difficult to know exactly what is going on at any particular point in time. Certainly, we will be hearing from the president later on when communications are reestablished. But for the moment now, Dan, what they're trying to do is make sure that the administration is in place to respond to this crisis, to ensure that the reins of government do not get broken, to ensure that they have communication with the leadership in Congress as well as the military. Those plans are in place right now. The president en route to a location where he can be assured of secure communications and contact with all of the officers that he needs to be in touch with. And again, Dan, we should be hearing from our people just as soon as they take the wraps off of this exactly where they are and what the immediate plan is. Dan?
John Robertson, Washington, of course, is concerned about how the government operates in Washington, but make no mistake, the center of this story today, these terrorist attacks, is at the tip of Manhattan, where the World Trade Centers, both of the Twin Towers, 110 stories up, both have collapsed. No one is making light of what's happened in Washington. Something happened at the Pentagon. An aircraft crashed at or right into the Pentagon, unclear exactly where. Unclear whether anybody was killed. Some people were hurt at the Pentagon. An early report from a government official that a car bomb exploded outside the State Department was later denied by the Federal Securities Operation. That the FBI, an FBI official told Jim Stewart that a plane crashed near Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland. But now there's some question as to what all that was about. As one would expect in the early hours, there is confusion about the facts. But a known fact is that there's been a terrible loss of life. How much, no one knows. The mayor of New York says a tremendous loss of life. A New York City police official who didn't want to be quoted said that he thought that the loss of life in the World Trade Center collapse. You're looking at a live picture of it now with this Empire State Building in the foreground and the smoke over the Hudson and the great New York Harbor, smoke in the nostrils of the Statue of Liberty, literally, that the loss of life here may be, according to the police official, in the many thousands, unquote, but that is not known. Now, authorities are on the alert from coast to coast, halting all air traffic, evacuating high-profile buildings, and tightening security at strategic facilities following these attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon. 4 airplanes are now confirmed to have been hijacked this morning. Whether it was one of those hijacked planes that hit the Pentagon, this is a live picture of the Pentagon, the first attack in the history of the United States Defense Department since it moved into this huge, sprawling Pentagon building in Washington. As you can see, there's considerable smoke, which may or may not indicate considerable damage at the Pentagon. Now, evacuations have been ordered at the United Nations building here in New York. This happened shortly after the 2 planes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and an aircraft of some sort crashed right into the Pentagon, or if not right into it, very First one plane hit a World Trade Center tower, then another plane hit the other tower. One tower collapses and the other collapses. Carol Maureen, our CBS News correspondent based in Chicago, is just back from this part of New York City. Carol?
Dan, I think I was in the second collapse or an explosion right after that, because I was trying to make my way around Stuyvesant High School. I believe that's correct. I'm not a New Yorker. But I was coming toward the World Trade Center looking for CBS crews and asked a firefighter if he saw any. He told me to walk down the middle of the road. All of a sudden, there was a roll, an explosion, and we could see coming at us a ball of flame stories high. He and others screamed, "Run," and I ran. I fell. One of them picked me up. We ran as fast as we could, and then he threw me into the wall of a building and covered me. Forgive me. I am in his debt. You know, Dan, I know firefighters do incredible work all of the time, but this was exceeded anything that I can imagine. He threw me into a wall, covered me with his body. I could feel his heart banging against my back. We were both so sure we were going to die. The flame somehow stopped short of us. But whatever collapsed created, and you saw it in some of that video, Dan, a rain of cinders so thick that you couldn't see this far in front of you and you couldn't breathe. A police officer, and I wish I knew the firefighter's name, a police officer by the name of Brendan Duke grabbed my hand, and he and I tried to find our way through it until we could hit a clearing in the light. What you're seeing on the ground here, Dan, was in the air, and you couldn't see. And again, we thought we were finished. We somehow got to the light. Another firefighter gave me his mask for a moment so I could breathe. And then I made my way somehow through the smoke into the light to our crews. There was a cameraman there whose head was bloody, and he was trying to shoot and set up some of these shots there. The firefighters, the police, the crews, the people streamed toward me as I made my way to the Trade Center, sobbing and crying and trying to call home on dead cell phones, but they couldn't get through. There is so much fear out there even now because of gas main leaks. There was a point at which I watched firefighters run. Someone threw me forward. A paramedic truck let me jump inside and drove me halfway, and then a New York City bus driver opened his doors of an empty bus and drove me here to the broadcast center. To all of them, I mean, citizens of New York and have remained amazingly calm but deeply frightened.
CBS News correspondent Carol Maureen, still covered with the smoke and pieces of the debris. Stick with us here, Carol. I want to repeat that New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani now says, and this is a direct quote, there have been a tremendous number of lives lost. Certainly no one at this early hour can know how many lives have been lost. But it's impossible to watch the pictures of both of the World Trade Centers collapsing. Keep in mind these buildings were 110 stories in height each, with 50,000 plus people generally working there on a weekday, which this of course is. So when the mayor of New York says there's been a tremendous number of lives lost, there's no question that it is true. Carol Maureen, did you see any bodies? Did you see anyone that you said to yourself, that person is dead?
I saw people on stretchers that I was certain were dead. I saw firefighters and paramedics going into buildings where they themselves had to wonder if they were coming out. But there were a surprising number of people ambulatory and making their way out. I saw much more of that than I saw actual carnage. The concern that I heard from police and fire was that the people who were dead didn't make their way out of those towers, that most of the death is contained within those buildings.
And perhaps some people still alive inside the building. That frequently happens when by earthquake or something else there's been a collapse such as this. But mark it, this is unprecedented. There has never been anything like this. The twin towers of the World Trade Centers collapsing, 4 airplanes hijacked within the space of an hour and a half or 2 hours. an apparent attack by air, plane crashing near Camp David. Details on that are still sketchy, and there's some question as to if a plane crashed there, how close it actually got to Camp David. President Bush on his way, presumably back to Washington. The White House has air fighter cover and has had such since the first reports of the World Trade Center attacks. President Bush says it's an apparent terrorist attack. It's clear that one of the suspects in this is the worldwide, what has been described as the worldwide terrorist network of Osama bin Laden. However, let us mark well that nobody knows who's responsible for these apparently coordinated attacks on selected targets in America today. That out of London, a Saudi dissident who is connected with Osama bin Laden pointed out today, this is Mr. Abdel Bari Atwan, editor of a London-based Arabic newspaper, said, and I quote him, Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden were, quote, almost certainly behind the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. This is this one man's opinion. This man, who is well connected with Osama bin Laden, says it is most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests in an unprecedented attack, a very big one. Atwan told Reuters, and he said that he personally received information that Osama bin Laden was planning very, very big attacks against American interests, unquote. Now, those are the quotes of one man in London. We want to underscore, italicize, put in all caps, nobody knows who's responsible for these attacks. Osama bin Laden gets blamed for almost everything in the way of this kind of attack around the world. There's been considerable controversy and debate in the upper reaches of Western diplomacy and intelligence agencies about whether he alone is capable of pulling off these kinds of attacks. But all of that will be for later to sort out. Clearly, someone had coordinated attacks on these selected targets. Byron Pitts, our CBS News correspondent, is on the telephone from the tip of Manhattan. Byron.
Dan, we're about 3 blocks away from where the planes crashed into the buildings. Joining me now is a security officer in the World Financial Center who was there when the first plane struck the building. Sir, what can you tell us?
Okay, what I can tell you is that roughly at about 10 minutes to 9, I was in the lobby of one of the buildings of the World Financial Center when I heard a rumble. I went outside. I saw the first plane strike the side of the building. There was a lull. A fire started in the top of the World Trade Center building, and then about 5 minutes later, a second plane struck. Debris everywhere. People jumping out of windows of the World Trade Center trying to save themselves. Literally jumping to their deaths.
Did you have the opportunity at all to evacuate some of the floors in the building you were in?
Yes, we did. Quick thinking of our forces there, decided to get everybody out as quick as possible after the first plane struck. That little lull period before the second one came helped us greatly in getting thousands of people out of one of our buildings.
Did you actually see the plane strike the building?
I saw the second plane strike the side of the building because I was outside evacuating employees from our building at that time. That was when we witnessed people jump into their deaths literally from the side of the World Trade Center building while it was engulfed in flames.
You were saying you've been near the scene recently. What was the situation there?
The situation there was that about 15 to 20 minutes later, the structure that was remaining of the World Trade Center buildings caved in and fell straight to the ground, literally covering everybody that was within a quarter-mile radius of that building. Myself included was stuck in the lobby area until the fire department came and got me out.
You were saying that, I've heard you on the radio talking to some of your colleagues. What's the latest information you're getting from the scene?
The latest information right now is that we have major gas leaks in that area, and they're making the area totally sterile around the World Trade Center and the World Financial Center area due to these gas leaks, because we've been having mini explosions happening from underneath because of all the carnage.
Can you get an explanation as to why cell phones in this area aren't working right now?
I can tell you the reason why a lot of the phones aren't working, and that's because the main transmission site that was on top of the World Trade Center controls a lot of those phones, and obviously it's no longer there therefore eliminating cell phone coverages for quite a few people.
Everybody who was near you, all those people got away, yes, safely?
Most of them did, sir. Some of them didn't. A lot of emergency service personnel were also injured. Obviously, there are casualties also. A lot of media trucks, a few of them were damaged also, as well as NYPD and fire department vehicles who could not evacuate the area in time when the two towers came down to the ground.
You said you'd seen this kind of thing when you lived overseas. Tell me about that.
I happened to be in Europe and England back in 1993 when the IRA had struck Camden Town with a bomb. There was a lot of carnage there. The IRA, as you know from past history, do a lot of this kind of thing in mainland England. But I can tell you, sir, that there has never, ever, in my witness of anything like this, been in this business for a long time, have I witnessed anything as to what I've seen today in mainland New York City.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman is a security officer in the World Financial Center. Dan, I'm going to pass the phone on to my colleague, Mika Brzezinski, who has another eyewitness. We've been held up in PS 89 Elementary School, a few blocks from the building, and grabbing people as they come by. Here's Mika.
Yeah, and Byron, one note on PS 89, I just spoke to the head custodian here, and he says for emergency workers or anybody in the area, there is water and food available here. Dan, I know you have new information. I'll send it back to you.
Thank you very much. Mika Brzezinski and Byron Pitts on the scene where the World Trade Centers have collapsed. We want to put up again for you, if we can, the airlines have confirmed that 4 aircraft were hijacked this morning, and the information on that, we're coming up to the top of the hour, we'll have as we go through the top of the hour. But it's noon in New York, just over 3 hours now since the first plane crashed into the first of the World Trade Center towers.